At 10 in the morning on Christmas Day, my own son blocked the doorway of the house I bought for him and looked at me with eyes void of any love. "You are not our family anymore," he said, his voice cold as the winter wind biting at my neck. "Go away, old man." Behind him, I saw his wife Tiffany covering her mouth to hide a cruel giggle while her parents raised their crystal wine glasses in a mocking toast. I stood there for a moment holding the turkey I had spent 6 hours roasting. I did not beg. I did not cry. I simply nodded, walked back to my rusted truck, and tossed the turkey into the garbage bin. Then I sat in the driver's seat and made exactly one phone call. 5 minutes later, the music inside that mansion stopped. 10 minutes later, every single guest at their table was fleeing the property as if the house itself were on fire. My name is Thaddeus Moore. I am 70 years old, and my son thought he was discarding a broken old laborer. He had no idea he was actually declaring war on the owner of the very ground he stood on. Before I tell you how I dismantled their entire lives before dessert was served, please like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The morning had started with a naive kind of hope. I drove my 20-year-old Ford F-150 down the winding roads of Whispering Pines, a gated community where the driveways were heated and the lawns were manicured with surgical precision. On the passenger seat beside me sat a 20-pound turkey wrapped in 3 layers of foil and heavy towels. It was Betty's recipe. My late wife had seasoned this bird every Christmas for 40 years, and since she passed, I had kept the tradition alive. The cabin of my truck smelled of sage rosemary and the deep earthy scent of roasted meat. To me, it smelled like love. To the residents of this neighborhood, it probably smelled like something that didn't belong. I pulled up to the curb of number 42 Oakview Drive. It was a sprawling colonial revival with white pillars and expansive bay windows. I knew every inch of that structure because I had inspected the foundation myself before I authorized the purchase through a shell company 3 years ago. My son Darnell believed he was renting it for $1 a month from a benevolent anonymous investor he had charmed at a networking event. He liked to tell people he was a marketing genius who knew how to work the system. He never suspected that the investor was the man in grease-stained coveralls who changed his oil. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing my best Sunday suit, but it was 10 years old and slightly tight around the shoulders. My hands were rough calloused from 50 years of laying pipe and welding steel. I was a black man in a neighborhood where the police were called if a car drove too slowly. But I was Darnell's father and it was Christmas. Surely that still meant something. I walked up the long driveway, the turkey heavy in my arms. Through the large bay window, I could see the golden glow of the chandelier. Darnell was standing by the fireplace holding a glass of scotch. He wore a velvet blazer that probably cost more than my truck. Tiffany was seated on the sofa laughing at something her father Brent was saying. Brent and Susan, Tiffany's parents, were there too. They looked like a picture from a magazine, polished, expensive, and utterly relaxed. I rang the doorbell. I heard the chimes echo inside, followed by the sharp click of dress shoes on marble. The door swung open. Darnell stood there filling the frame. He didn't step aside to let me in. He didn't smile. He looked at the aluminum foil bundle in my arms and then up at my face with an expression of profound irritation. "Dad," he said. His voice was a hushed hiss. "What are you doing here?" I shifted the weight of the turkey. "Merry Christmas, son. I brought the bird. Mom's recipe. I thought we were eating at 1. Darnell ran a hand over his freshly trimmed beard. He glanced back over his shoulder at his guests and then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door almost shut behind him. The heat from inside escaped, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and pine. "Look, plans changed," Darnell said, refusing to meet my eyes. "Tiffany's parents are here. Brent and Susan. They flew in from the coast last night. This is a formal brunch, Dad. A high-end networking opportunity. Brent is introducing me to some major players in the tech sector." I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the snow falling around us. "So I cannot meet them?" I asked. "I put on a tie, Darnell." Darnell let out a short, cruel laugh. "A tie, Dad, look at you. You drove that scrap metal truck here and parked it right in front of the house. The neighbors are probably already texting the HOA. And that smell. You smell like grease and old spices." "It is sage, Darnell," I said quietly. "It is your mother's seasoning. It smells like poverty," Darnell snapped. His facade of politeness evaporated. "Tiffany's parents are classy people, Dad. They don't understand your world. They don't want to sit across from a man who looks like he just crawled out from under a sink. You don't fit the aesthetic we are building here." The door opened wider behind him. Tiffany appeared. She was wearing a white silk dress that looked like it would stain if you breathed on it wrong. Her blonde hair was swept up in an intricate twist. She looked at me and then wrinkled her nose. "Babe, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Oh, Thaddeus, you brought food. That is so quaint," Tiffany Darnell said, stepping between us. "Dad was just leaving. He got the dates mixed up." I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he married. I saw the disdain etched into the lines of their faces. I saw Brent and Susan peering out from the hallway, holding their wine glasses, watching the scene like it was a reality show for their amusement. "Darnell," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am your father. I paid for your college. I helped you when you crashed your first car. I am the only family you have left on this earth." Darnell's face hardened. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of aged scotch. "That is the problem, Dad. You are an anchor. I am trying to sail, and you are dragging me down to the bottom with your blue-collar stories and your embarrassing truck. You are not our family anymore. You are a liability. Go away." He stepped back and grabbed the door handle. Tiffany offered a small pitying wave, her eyes dancing with malicious delight. "Go home, Thaddeus," she said. "We will send you a card." The heavy oak door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. I heard the deadbolt slide home. Through the glass side panel, I saw Darnell turn back to his guests. I saw him shrug and laugh. I saw Tiffany lean into him, whispering something that made her mother smile. I stood on the porch for a long moment. The turkey was still warm in my arms, but my hands felt like ice. I looked at the wreath hanging on the door, a wreath I knew cost $400 because I monitored the credit card statements. I looked at the Mercedes in the driveway, the car Darnell claimed he bought with a bonus but was actually leased under my holding company. I turned around and walked down the steps. I did not look back. I walked to the large metal trash bins at the end of the driveway. I lifted the lid. With a deliberate motion, I dropped the 20-pound turkey into the bin. It landed with a heavy thud. I wiped my hands on my handkerchief. I walked to my truck and climbed in. The engine roared to life with a sputter and a cough. I let it idle for a moment, watching the house. They were safe inside, warm, arrogant, and completely ignorant of the ground shifting beneath their feet. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I scrolled past Darnell's contact. I scrolled past the local mechanic. I stopped at a name I hadn't called in 2 years, Reginald Moss. Reggie was the most expensive, most ruthless lawyer in the state. He was also the man who sat beside me in the trenches of Vietnam 50 years ago. He picked up on the second ring. Thaddeus Reggie's voice boomed. "Merry Christmas, you old badger," calling to wish me well. "Not today, Reggie," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "I am sitting outside the property on Oakview. The asset is compromised," Reggie asked, his tone instantly shifting to professional alertness. "The asset is hostile," I corrected. "Darnell just evicted me from the premises. He declared I am no longer family. He is entertaining unauthorized guests." "The lease agreement, the one we kept in the safe." "The dormant contract," Reggie said. "Clause 4A, termination upon disrespect or failure to maintain family conduct. It was your specific addition, Thaddeus. I told you it was draconian at the time. It is necessary," I said. "Execute Protocol Z, Reggie. Burn it down. All of it." There was a brief silence on the line. Then I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking. "I can have the retrieval team there in 12 minutes, Reggie said. "I can cut the financial feed in 3. Are you sure, Thaddeus? This is the nuclear option." I looked through the window one last time. I saw Darnell raising a toast. He looked like a king in a castle made of clouds. "I am sure," I said. "Start the clock." I hung up the phone and leaned back in the seat. I didn't drive away. I wanted a front row seat. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard. 10:12 a.m. At 10:15 a.m. inside the house, the first domino would fall. I imagined Tiffany sliding my black American Express card, the supplementary one I had given Darnell for emergencies, which they used for luxuries, across the catering company's mobile terminal. I waited. The winter sun reflected off the snow, blindingly bright. Suddenly, the front door opened again. A man in a catering uniform walked out, looking confused and angry. He was holding a card reader up to the sky as if searching for a signal. He walked back inside. 2 minutes later, 3 large commercial tow trucks turned the corner of the street. They were not the polite 8AA trucks. These were the heavy-duty repossession vehicles, massive beasts of steel and cable with flashing yellow lights. They didn't use sirens, but the rumble of their diesel engines shook the quiet morning air. They pulled up directly in front of the driveway, blocking the exit. The lead driver, a man named Big Mike who managed my fleet of construction vehicles, hopped out. He was holding a clipboard. He didn't look at the house. He looked at my truck, saw me nod once, and then marched up the driveway. He didn't ring the doorbell. He pounded on the door with a fist the size of a ham. I rolled down my window to hear the music of consequences. The door opened. Darnell stood there again, but this time his scotch glass was gone. "Can I help you?" Darnell demanded, trying to maintain his air of superiority. "You are blocking my driveway, Mr. Darnell Moore." Mike's voice carried over the wind. "I am here on behalf of T&B Holdings. We have a repossession order for the Mercedes S-Class and the Lexus SUV." "What?" Darnell laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "That is ridiculous. I own those cars. My father bought them for me." "Correction," Mike said, looking at his clipboard. "The company bought them. You are merely the authorized user. Authorization has been revoked as of 10 minutes ago due to violation of the user agreement, specifically the clause regarding conduct detrimental to the benefactor." Tiffany came running to the door. "What is going on? Who are these people?" "They are taking the cars, babe," Darnell stammered. "It must be a mistake. A computer glitch." Mike signaled to his drivers. They didn't wait for permission. Chains rattled, hooks were lowered. The first tow truck backed up to the Mercedes. The sound of metal on metal was sharp and violent. "Stop," Tiffany screamed. "That is my car. You cannot take my Lexus. I have my yoga mat in there." "Call the police." "Brent," her father shouted from the doorway. "This is theft." I watched as Darnell pulled out his phone. He dialed frantically. I watched his face crumble as he realized the call wasn't going through. I had canceled the family phone plan too. Mike hooked the Mercedes. The car tilted upward, looking helpless and heavy. I started my engine. I put the truck into drive and slowly rolled past the house. I didn't speed up. I drove at a crawl. Darnell looked up. He saw me. He saw his father, the man he called an anchor, driving the beat-up Ford he despised. Our eyes met. He looked at the tow trucks. He looked at me. And for the first time in his life, the math started to click in his head. The fear in his eyes was primal. I didn't smile, I didn't wave, I just kept driving. I had a meeting with a banker to get to, and my son had a very long walk ahead of him. I sat in the cab of my Ford F-150 and watched the scene through the bay window like a silent movie. Inside the warmth of the mansion I had paid for, Darnell was raising a crystal flute of champagne high in the air. His face was flushed with the intoxicating mix of alcohol and arrogance. Beside him, Tiffany was laughing, her head thrown back, exposing her long neck, while her father, Brent, clapped Darnell on the shoulder with a fatherly pride he had never earned. It was a picture-perfect Christmas tableau, the kind they print on cards to sell to people who dream of a life they cannot afford. I remembered the day we bought that black Mercedes S-Class sitting in the driveway. Darnell had stood in the dealership showroom, his eyes wide and pleading like a child. He told me he needed it to close deals that clients would not trust a marketing director who drove a Honda. I wrote the check for $120,000 without blinking, not because I believed him, but because I wanted him to feel proud. I wanted him to have the start in life I never had. I put the title in the name of T&B Holdings solely for liability purposes, a detail Darnell had waved off as boring paperwork. Now looking at him toasting the people who despised me, I realized that car was never a tool for business. It was just another costume in the play he was acting, in a play where I was no longer cast. The silence in the cab was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of my engine. Then the ground began to vibrate. At first it was subtle, a low-frequency rumble that shook the snow from the pine trees lining the street. Then it grew louder, a mechanical roar that drowned out the distant holiday music. I checked my watch. Protocol Z was right on schedule. Around the corner, the 3 massive tow trucks appeared, moving in a synchronized formation that would have made a military convoy proud. These were not the small flatbeds you call when you have a flat tire. These were the snatchers, the heavy-duty repossession units with hydraulic lifts and reinforced steel bumpers designed to take what was owed regardless of resistance. Their amber warning lights cut through the gray winter morning, spinning and flashing, reflecting off the pristine white snow like a warning beacon. They did not slow down as they approached the house. They swerved into the driveway with practiced aggression blocking the exit completely. The lead truck driven by Big Mike reversed with terrifying speed toward the Mercedes. The backup alarm beeped incessantly, a shrill piercing sound that shattered the peace of the exclusive neighborhood. I saw the guests inside the house freeze. Darnell's toast hung in the air, his glass half raised. Tiffany turned toward the window, her mouth forming a perfect O of confusion. The second truck maneuvered toward Tiffany's white Lexus SUV parked on the street. The sound of heavy chains dragging across the asphalt was visceral, a metallic screech that sounded like violence. Big Mike hopped out of his cab. He did not walk to the front door to ask for keys. He did not look for permission. He knelt by the rear wheels of the Mercedes and threw the hook around the axle. The metal clanked loudly against the undercarriage. It was the sound of finality. Inside the house, the spell broke. I saw the panic set in. Guests dropped their drinks. A woman in a red dress pointed frantically at the window. Darnell pushed past Brent, nearly knocking the older man over in his haste to get to the door. The facade of their elegant, high-class brunch was dissolving into chaos before my eyes. The front door flew open, and Darnell exploded onto the porch. He had forgotten his coat. The freezing wind whipped his velvet blazer around his waist, and his expensive dress shirt was already spotting with snow. He looked wild, his eyes darting from the trucks to the drivers, to the cars he believed were his birthright. "Hey!" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "What are you doing? Get away from my car!" He ran down the steps, slipping on a patch of ice and nearly falling face first into the snow. He scrambled upright and threw himself between the tow truck and the Mercedes, spreading his arms as if he could physically stop the hydraulic lift. "Stop it," I said. "Stop it. This is a mistake." Tiffany was right behind him, shrieking like a banshee. Her silk dress was dragging in the slush, but she did not seem to notice. "That is my car. You cannot take it. I have presents in the trunk." Big Mike did not even flinch. He stood up, wiping grease on his pants, and looked Darnell up and down with the disinterested stare of a man who had heard every excuse in the book. "Step aside, sir," Mike said, his voice calm and booming. "I have a repossession order for both vehicles." Darnell's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Repossession. That is impossible. I paid for this car. My father paid for this car. Call him right now." He pointed a shaking finger at me sitting in my truck across the street. "Call him, he will tell you." Mike looked at his clipboard and then looked at me. I slowly rolled down my window. The cold air rushed in, but I felt warm. Darnell's eyes locked onto mine. He looked desperate, pleading the arrogance of 10 minutes ago, completely gone, replaced by the terrified look of a boy who had broken a window. "Dad," he shouted, tell them this is a mistake." I looked at him. I looked at the son who had just told me I was no longer family because I smelled like labor. I looked at the daughter-in-law who had laughed at my turkey. I looked at Brent and Susan standing in the doorway, clutching their pearls and wine glasses, looking at the scene with absolute horror. I leaned my head out the window. "There is no mistake," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried through the cold air with crystal clarity. "The owner of the vehicles has revoked your privileges, Darnell. T&B Holdings does not lend assets to non-employees, and since you just fired your father from your family, I assume you have resigned from my good graces as well." Darnell's jaw dropped. "But Dad, you cannot do this. It is Christmas." "It was Christmas 10 minutes ago, too," I replied. "When you slammed the door in my face!" Tiffany lunged at the driver, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. "You old senile fool, giving us these cars was a gift. You cannot take back a gift." Mike stepped between Tiffany and his truck. "Ma'am, the title is in the company name. It was never a gift. It was a company perk, and the CEO just canceled it." He hit the lever on the side of the truck. The hydraulics whined and the rear of the Mercedes lifted into the air. Darnell watched helplessly as his status symbol, his pride, his identity was hoisted up like a piece of dead meat. The second truck had already hooked the Lexus. The alarm on Tiffany's car began to blare, adding a rhythmic honking to the cacophony of screams and diesel engines. Brent stepped out onto the porch, his face pale. "Thaddeus, this is highly irregular. We have guests inside. This is embarrassing." I looked at the man who had been drinking my wine in my house, eating the food paid for by my money. "Irregular?" I asked. "Irregular is living like a king on a pauper's budget, Brent. Irregular is biting the hand that feeds you and then expecting it to stroke your ego. Enjoy the walk home." Big Mike climbed back into his cab. He gave a short blast of the air horn, a sound so loud it made Tiffany jump and cover her ears. The trucks began to move. The chains pulled taut. The Mercedes and the Lexus rolled away from the house, leaving tire tracks in the snow and a gaping empty space in the driveway. Darnell stood in the snow in his socks, shivering uncontrollably, watching his life being towed away. He looked small. He looked defeated. But I knew this was just the beginning. The cars were just the appetizer. The main course was yet to be served. I put my truck in gear and drove away, leaving them standing in the cold, surrounded by the ruins of their vanity. Big Mike did not get back in his truck immediately. He stood on the snowy asphalt like a judge handing down a sentence, holding a clipboard thick with legal documents against his chest. The commotion had drawn the rest of the brunch guests out of the warmth of the mansion. They huddled on the porch, wrapped in cashmere shawls and expensive wool coats, holding their champagne flutes as if they were watching a piece of performance art rather than a family tragedy. I saw the way they looked at Darnell. 10 minutes ago, they looked at him with envy and admiration. Now their gazes held the sharp, stinging bite of curiosity and judgment. Darnell was shivering violently in his thin velvet blazer, his socks soaked through with freezing slush, but he was too paralyzed by shame to move. He tried to wave Mike away, to make him disappear with a flick of his wrist like a servant who had spoken out of turn. "Just go," Darnell hissed, his voice trembling. "We will sort this out later. Just take them and go before you make a scene." But Big Mike was enjoying this. He was a man who worked with his hands, a man who knew the value of a dollar, and he had no patience for the counterfeit aristocracy Darnell was trying to project. Mike cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding in a mixer. He raised his voice so it boomed across the front lawn, echoing off the brick facades of the neighboring houses. "Correction. Mr. Moore," Mike announced, his breath pluming in the cold air. "There is nothing to sort out. The seizure order is specific. I am reading from the document provided by the asset owner T&B Holdings." He looked directly at the cluster of guests on the porch, making sure they caught every syllable. "Repossession is effective immediately due to breach of contract. The user Darnell Moore has failed to meet the basic requirements of the lease agreement, specifically the clause regarding conduct detrimental to the benefactor. Furthermore, the lease payments of $1 per month, which were a charitable concession by the owner, have been deemed a waste of corporate assets." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd on the porch. I saw a woman in a fur coat lean over to her husband and whisper something behind her hand. Darnell turned a shade of pale gray. $1 a month. The secret was out. He had told everyone he bought those cars with the bonuses from his marketing genius. He had told Brent he paid cash to avoid the interest rates. Now everyone knew he was driving charity. He was driving his father's generosity, and he had just crashed it into a wall of his own arrogance. "That is a lie," Tiffany screamed, running down the driveway, her heels slipping on the ice. She looked deranged, her perfect hair coming undone in the wind. "My husband bought these cars. He runs this city. You are just a thief trying to scam us. I am calling the police." She fumbled with her phone, her acrylic nails clicking frantically against the screen. "I am going to have you arrested. I'm going to have you thrown in jail for grand theft auto." Big Mike just smiled a cold, professional smile. "Go ahead, ma'am. Call them. I have all day." He leaned against the grill of the tow truck, crossed his arms, and waited. Darnell tried to grab Tiffany's arm to stop her. "Tiffany." "Don't," he begged, his eyes wide with panic. "Don't call the cops. We can fix this." But she shook him off. She was fueled by the righteous indignation of a woman who had never been told no in her life. She dialed 911 and screamed into the receiver, demanding immediate assistance for an armed robbery in progress. I watched from my truck. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee from my thermos. This was part of the plan, too. I knew Tiffany. I knew her entitlement was a weapon that would eventually point back at her. I waited. The guests on the porch looked uncomfortable now, shuffling their feet, checking their watches, wondering if they could slip away to their cars without being noticed. But the tow trucks blocked the driveway completely. They were trapped in the theater of Darnell's humiliation. 5 minutes later, a patrol car turned the corner, sirens wailing. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. Tiffany ran to them, pointing a shaking finger at Big Mike. "Arrest him!" she shrieked. "He is stealing my Lexus! He is stealing my husband's Mercedes! He threatened us!" The older officer, a sergeant with a weary face, held up a hand to silence her. "Calm down, ma'am. Who owns these vehicles?" "We do," Darnell said, stepping forward, trying to muster some of his lost dignity. "I do. They are mine." Big Mike wordlessly handed the clipboard to the sergeant. The officer flipped through the pages. He looked at the registration. He looked at the title deeds. He looked at the repossession order signed by a judge. He looked at Darnell. "Sir," the officer said, his voice flat and bored, "according to these documents, you are not the owner. T&B Holdings is the registered owner. You are listed as a permissive user. And here is the revocation of permission signed by the CEO this morning." The officer pointed to the signature at the bottom of the page. Darnell looked. He saw the name, Thaddeus Moore. He looked up at me across the street. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just lost the cars. He had been caught in a lie in front of the law. "I don't understand," Brent said, stepping off the porch. He walked up to the police officer, his expensive shoes crunching in the snow. "Darnell, you told me the title was in your name. You told me you moved the assets to your personal portfolio last quarter." Darnell stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. I was going to... It is a tax thing, Brent. Thing. It is complicated corporate structure." The officer handed the clipboard back to Mike. "This is a civil matter, sir. The paperwork is in order. These men have the right to take the vehicles. Step aside and let them do their job, or I will have to cite you for obstruction." Tiffany gasped. "You are useless," she spat at the officer. "Do you know who my father is?" The officer gave her a look that suggested he didn't care if her father was the Pope. "Step aside, ma'am." Big Mike gave the signal. The diesel engines roared again. The chains tightened with a groan of straining metal. The Mercedes S-Class, Darnell's pride, his shield, his mask was lifted entirely off the ground. It hung there swinging slightly in the winter wind, a dead weight of metal and leather. Then the Lexus followed. The tow trucks began to reverse, slowly maneuvering the captured prizes out into the street. Brent looked at Darnell. The admiration that had been in his eyes 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, hard calculation. He was a man who valued success, and he was looking at a man who had just been exposed as a fraud. "You lied," Darnell Brent said quietly. His voice cut through the noise of the engines. "You lied about the cars. What else have you lied about?" Darnell didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there, shivering in the snow, watching his status symbols disappear around the corner. The guests on the porch began to murmur loudly now. I saw Susan Tiffany's mother clutch her handbag tight and turn back toward the house, her face pinched with embarrassment. The driveway was empty. The show was over. Big Mike honked his horn one last time, a final salute to the boss, and drove away. The police officer got back in his cruiser and left, leaving Darnell and Tiffany standing in the slush surrounded by the ruins of their reputation. I put my truck in gear. I eased off the brake. My tires crunched on the ice. I drove slowly past the house. I rolled down the window completely. The cold air bit my face, but I didn't flinch. I drove past Tiffany, who was sobbing into her hands. I drove past Brent, who was staring at the empty spot where the Mercedes used to be. And then I was level with Darnell. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with shock and a dawning horror. He looked at me, expecting me to stop, expecting me to roll down the window and yell or lecture or perhaps offer him a way out. He expected the father who had always saved him to save him one more time. I stopped the truck for a heartbeat. I turned my head and looked him dead in the eye. I didn't say a word. I didn't frown. I didn't smile. I just looked at him with the absolute indifference of a stranger. I let him see the void where his father used to be. I let him feel the weight of the silence between us, a silence he had created and I was now enforcing. He took a step toward the truck, his hand reaching out. "Dad," he whispered. I pressed the accelerator. The truck moved forward, steady and relentless. I watched him in my side mirror as he shrank into the distance, a small, dark figure against the white snow of the empty driveway. He was alone, and I had a meeting with a bank manager to ensure he stayed that way. I drove my rusted Ford back to the south side of the city. The neighborhood was different here. The driveways were cracked and the houses sat close together like huddled shoulders against the cold. My apartment was on the second floor of a brick duplex I had bought 30 years ago. It was simple. The carpet was worn and the furniture was older than my son, but it was paid for. It was mine. Darnell hated this place. He called it a dungeon. He said it smelled like old memories and stagnation. He did not understand that this apartment was the command center of an empire he didn't even know existed. I walked into my small office and locked the door. I pushed aside a painting of a lighthouse on the wall to reveal a heavy steel wall safe. It was an old model, purely mechanical, with a dial that clicked satisfyingly under my fingers. I spun the combination, left to 20, right to 10, left to 5. The heavy door swung open with a groan of well-oiled steel. Inside, there were no stacks of cash or gold bars. Instead, there was a single thick, leather-bound ledger, the Black Book. I sat at my desk and opened it. The pages were filled with my handwriting columns of numbers and dates documenting every single dollar I had funneled into Darnell's life for the past decade. The down payment on the mansion, the seed money for his failing marketing firm, the monthly allowances disguised as dividends from a trust that didn't exist. The total at the bottom of the last page was staggering, $2.5 million. Money I had earned laying pipelines under the city, dealing with city councils, and quietly buying distressed properties when no one was looking. I was not just a retired laborer. I was T&B Holdings. I owned the strip mall where Darnell bought his coffee. I owned the warehouse district where he claimed to have an office. I owned the ground he walked on, and he treated me like the dirt beneath his shoes. I closed the book. The time for accounting was over. The time for liquidation had began. I powered up my computer. It was a high-end machine with 3 monitors, a stark contrast to the rest of the room. I logged into the corporate banking portal, the screen filled with rows of accounts and balances. I navigated to the sub-account labeled Darnell Lifestyle. It was a line of credit I had established to keep up appearances for him. It had a limit of $50,000 a month, and he usually maxed it out. I looked at the active cards linked to the account. There were 2, a Platinum Visa for him and a Black Centurion for Tiffany. They flashed these cards around town like badges of honor, unaware that I paid the bill every 30 days. My cursor hovered over the Suspend All Services button. It was a small red rectangle on the screen, a simple digital switch. Yet pressing it felt heavier than lifting a steel beam. This was the lifeline. This was the blood supply to their artificial existence. If I clicked this, I was not just cutting off their money. I was cutting off their identity. I remembered Darnell as a boy asking for a few dollars for the ice cream truck. I remembered his smile. Then I remembered the door slamming in my face an hour ago. I remembered Tiffany laughing at my turkey. I remembered Brent looking at me like I was the help. My finger came down on the mouse. Click. A dialog box popped up. Are you sure you want to suspend all associated cards and freeze assets? This action is immediate and irreversible. I didn't hesitate this time. I hit enter. The screen refreshed. Status suspended. The font turned red. It was done. The invisible stream of wealth that had kept Darnell's delusions alive had just dried up. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It was power. It was the cold, absolute power of a man who finally decides to stop holding up the sky for people who hate him. 5 miles away in the dining room of the Oakview mansion, the atmosphere was already tense. The guests were still whispering about the tow trucks, but Tiffany was trying to salvage the brunch. She had ordered the catering staff to bring out the main course early. It was an extravagant spread. Lobster tails, imported cheeses, truffle-infused pasta, and bottles of vintage Dom Perignon. The head caterer, a man named Pierre, who I knew personally because he rented his commercial kitchen space from me, walked up to Darnell. Pierre looked nervous. He had seen the cars being towed. He knew the smell of trouble. Mr. Moore, Pierre said discreetly, before we serve the champagne, I need to settle the final bill. It is company policy for events over $10,000. Darnell adjusted his jacket, trying to regain his composure. Of course, Pierre, no problem. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the Platinum Visa. He handed it over with a flourish loud enough for Brent and Susan to hear. Put it on this card, and add a 20% tip for the trouble earlier. Pierre took the card and inserted it into his portable chip reader. The machine beeped once. Processing. The room went silent. Everyone watched. Darnell smiled at Brent. Just a misunderstanding with the leasing company, Brent. We are sorting it out. The machine made a harsh, low buzzing sound. Declined. Pierre frowned. I am sorry, Mr. Moore. It did not go through. Darnell laughed nervously. That is impossible. There is no limit on that card. Try it again. The chip is probably dirty. He rubbed the card on his velvet sleeve and handed it back. Pierre tried again. He held the machine up, trying to get a better signal. He inserted the card. He waited. Buzz. Declined. Message code 05, contact issuer. Darnell's smile faltered. Here, use Tiffany's card. He snapped his fingers at his wife. Tiffany dug into her clutch and produced the heavy Black Centurion card. She slammed it on the table. This one never fails. It is invite only. Pierre took the black card. He swiped it. The machine didn't even wait to process. It beeped instantly. Card blocked. Confiscate immediately. Pierre looked at the screen and then at Darnell. His face hardened. Mr. Moore, both cards are dead. The bank order says confiscate. What? Darnell shouted, standing up. That is insane. My father must have messed up the transfer. Do you have another form of payment? Pierre asked, his voice losing all politeness. The total is $15,400. Darnell patted his pockets. He looked at Tiffany. She shook her head, her eyes wide with panic. I don't have cash, Darnell. Who carries cash? Brent Susan. Pierre asked, turning to the in-laws. Perhaps you can cover it. Brent turned a shade of crimson. I left my wallet at the hotel. We assumed Darnell was hosting. Pierre nodded slowly. I see. He turned to his staff. Pack it up. Excuse me, Tiffany shrieked. People are hungry. You cannot just leave. We are not leaving, ma'am, Pierre said. We are taking the food. We do not serve without payment. Boys, clear the table. The catering staff moved in like locusts. They didn't do it gently. They grabbed the plates of lobster right out from under the guests' noses. They corked the open champagne bottles. They swept the truffle pasta back into metal trays. The sound of silverware clattering and plates stacking filled the room, drowning out the holiday music. It was a scene of utter humiliation. The guests watched in horror as their lunch was repossessed bite by bite. Darnell stood there helpless, watching the feast vanish. He looked at the empty table, then at the confused, angry faces of his guests. I am leaving, a woman in a fur coat announced, standing up. This is a circus. Me too, her husband agreed. Darnell, this is disgraceful. The guests began to file out. They didn't say thank you. They didn't say Merry Christmas. They just grabbed their coats and fled the scene of the disaster. Brent and Susan stood by the door, shivering. Their driver had been dismissed because Darnell had promised to drive them back in the Mercedes that was currently in an impound lot across town. Darnell Brent said, his voice trembling with rage. Call us a car. We are going back to the Four Seasons. Darnell pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen frantically. Then he looked up, his face pale. My Uber account. It is linked to the credit card. It won't let me book a ride. Susan let out a small sob. We are stranded. We are stranded in this house with no food and no car. You will have to call a taxi, Brent said, disgusted. An old-fashioned taxi. And you will have to pay cash, Darnell, because I am certainly not paying for my own rescue. I watched the GPS tracker on my computer screen. I saw the dot representing Darnell's phone pacing back and forth in the hallway. I saw the catering van leaving the property. I leaned back in my chair in the quiet of my apartment. The silence here was peaceful. The silence in that mansion must have been deafening. Protocol Z was in full effect, and I hadn't even served the eviction notice yet. The silence of the morning after Christmas was a luxury I had not afforded myself in years. I sat on the worn velvet armchair in my living room, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that Betty had bought at a flea market 20 years ago. The sun was streaming through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was peaceful. It was quiet. It was the calm before the second storm. At 8:30 in the morning, the pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was a rhythmic, violent hammering that shook the doorframe. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush. I took another sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness before placing the mug on the coaster. I walked to the door, my boots heavy on the hardwood floor. I knew exactly who was on the other side. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Darnell and Tiffany stood on my porch, shivering in the biting cold. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck. Darnell was wearing the same velvet blazer from yesterday, but it was wrinkled and stained. His expensive dress shoes were covered in gray slush. Tiffany looked even worse. Her mascara was smeared around her eyes like war paint, and she was wrapped in a coat that looked too thin for the weather. They didn't have a car. I saw a yellow taxi pulling away from the curb. They had paid cash to come here to scream at me. Before I could even say hello, Tiffany pushed past me into the hallway. Her perfume was stale, mixed with the scent of desperation. "You crazy old man!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Do you have any idea what you did to us? You ruined my first Christmas as a wife. You humiliated my parents. My mother had to take a taxi, Thaddeus." A taxi that smelled like cigarettes. Darnell followed her in, kicking the door shut behind him. He didn't look at me with shame. He looked at me with a terrifying sense of entitlement. His eyes were bloodshot. "Fix it, Dad," Darnell demanded. He paced the small living room like a caged animal kicking at the edge of my rug. "Call the bank. Call the leasing company. Tell them it was a computer error. I have clients calling me. My LinkedIn premium subscription bounced this morning. Do you know how embarrassing that is?" I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. I watched them invade my sanctuary. They weren't here to apologize. They weren't here to ask for forgiveness. They were here because the ATM had stopped dispensing cash and they wanted to kick the machine until it started working again. "I am not fixing anything," I said calmly. The glitch was corrected, Darnell. The error was funding a lifestyle you did not earn. Tiffany spun around, her face twisted in a sneer. "Oh, spare us the moral high ground speech. We know what this is really about. You are jealous." "Jealous?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, jealous," she spat. "You hate that Darnell loves me. You hate that he fits into my world, a world of class and sophistication that you could never understand. You are just a bitter, lonely old man who wants to control him because you have nothing else. You saw my parents yesterday. You saw how much Darnell respects them, and you couldn't handle it. You wanted to punish him for loving a family that actually has standards." I looked at her. I looked at this woman who thought class was a logo on a handbag. Darnell stepped forward, pointing a finger in my face. "She is right, Dad. This is petty. You are punishing me because I moved on, because I leveled up. But you cannot cut me off. That money isn't even yours." I stared at him. "What did you say?" "That money," Darnell shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. "The trust fund, the allowance. That is Mom's money. It is her life insurance policy. It is her savings. You are just the executor. You have no right to withhold my inheritance. You are stealing from me, Thaddeus. You are stealing my mother's legacy to feed your own ego." The air in the room grew heavy. The mention of Betty was a mistake, a fatal, tactical error. Darnell had built a fantasy in his head. He had convinced himself that his father, the man in the work boots, was incapable of generating wealth. He believed the money came from a magical pot of gold left by his mother, a woman who worked as a school librarian for 30 years. I walked over to the steel safe on the wall. I spun the dial. Darnell watched me, his eyes hungry, thinking I was getting cash. I pulled out a thin folder and tossed it onto the coffee table. It slid across the surface and stopped in front of him. "Open it," I said. Darnell frowned. He picked up the folder and flipped it open. It wasn't cash. It was a copy of Betty's death certificate and the final probate documents from 10 years ago. "Read the bottom line," I commanded. Darnell's eyes scanned the paper. He squinted. "Estate value, $2,400. He looked up confused. "That is a typo. Mom had millions. We lived in that house. We had the cars. Your mother died with $2,000 in her checking account." "Darnell," I said, my voice cold as ice. "She was a good woman, but she wasn't rich. She didn't leave you a trust fund. She left you her recipes and her love." "Then where did the money come from?" Darnell whispered, the paper shaking in his hand. "It came from me," I said. "It came from the dirt, Darnell. It came from 50 years of waking up at 4 in the morning. It came from buying swampland when everyone said I was crazy and selling it to developers 10 years later. It came from T&B Holdings. Thaddeus and Betty, I made that money. Every single cent you have spent on suits and champagne and cars came from these hands." I held up my hands, palms open, showing him the calluses and the scars. "That allowance wasn't an inheritance," I continued, stepping closer to him. "It was a payroll check. I treated you like an employee, Darnell. I paid you a salary to be my son. I invested in you hoping you would grow into a partner, but I audited the books yesterday, and I realized I have been pouring capital into a failing venture." Darnell took a step back, hitting the edge of the sofa. "No, that is a lie. You are a laborer. You fix pipes. I own the company that fixes the pipes I corrected, and as the CEO, I am making a personnel decision. You are fired, Darnell. Your position as my dependent has been terminated effective immediately due to gross misconduct and insubordination." Tiffany laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "You expect us to believe that? You are lying. You are just trying to scare us." "Darnell, tell him he is lying." Darnell looked at me. He looked at the apartment, the worn carpet, the old furniture. He couldn't reconcile the man he saw with the numbers he had spent. Get out, I said. No, Darnell said, his face hardening again. Not until you reactivate the cards. I don't care where the money comes from. I have a reputation, Dad. You cannot do this to me. I will not leave until you fix this. He sat down on my armchair, crossing his arms like a petulant child. Tiffany sat next to him, glaring at me. We are staying right here, she threatened, until you come to your senses. I looked at them. They were invaders in the only place I had left. Fine, I said. Stay. I turned and walked into the kitchen. I opened the back door that led to the small yard. It was freezing outside. The garden hose was coiled by the faucet. I had used it yesterday to rinse the road salt off the undercarriage of my truck before the freeze set in. It was a heavy-duty industrial hose with a high-pressure brass nozzle. I turned the tap. The water rushed through the rubber pipe. I tested the nozzle. A jet of freezing water shot out, hitting the fence with a sharp slap. I dragged the hose through the kitchen and into the hallway. Darnell looked up. What are you doing? I am cleaning the trash out of my house, I said. I squeezed the trigger. The stream of water hit Darnell squarely in the chest. It wasn't a trickle. It was a blast of ice-cold liquid that soaked his velvet blazer in a second. He screamed, jumping up from the chair. Hey, stop it! That is freezing! I turned the nozzle toward Tiffany. She shrieked, diving behind the sofa. I said, get out, I roared, advancing on them. I sprayed them again. The water was relentless. It soaked the carpet. It soaked their clothes. It filled the air with a mist that felt like needles on the skin. Darnell slipped on the wet floor, scrambling to get away from the stream. He looked like a wet rat. He grabbed Tiffany's hand and dragged her toward the door. You are crazy, he shouted, shielding his face. You are insane. I blasted them all the way to the threshold. I didn't stop until they were on the porch, until they were running down the steps, slipping on the ice, their expensive clothes ruined, their dignity washed away. I slammed the door and locked it. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, listening to the water drip from the walls. My living room was a mess. My carpet was soaked. But the air felt cleaner than it had in years. I walked back to the kitchen and turned off the tap. I had a mess to clean up. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind the work. I spent the next 2 hours drying out my hallway with old towels. The silence in the apartment was heavy, but it was mine. I sat at my kitchen table, polishing off the rest of the cold coffee, waiting for the next wave. I knew my son. Darnell was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who escalated until he hit a wall he couldn't climb. At noon, the doorbell rang again. This time there was no pounding, just a firm, confident press of the button. I walked to the door and opened it. Darnell was there. He had changed his clothes, wearing a fresh suit that looked like it hadn't been tailored yet. Beside him stood a man I didn't recognize. He was young, wearing a suit that was too shiny and holding a briefcase that looked like it was made of vinyl, not leather. He had the hungry look of a lawyer who advertised on bus benches. Tiffany stood behind them, arms crossed, her face a mask of smug anticipation. Mr. Moore, the young man said, extending a hand. I ignored. I am Barry Lipschitz. I represent your son, Darnell Moore. We are here to serve you with a notice of intent to sue for assault regarding the water hose incident earlier this morning. Furthermore, we are filing an emergency injunction to restore access to the financial assets you illegally froze. Darnell stepped forward, his chest puffed out. You messed up, Dad. You assaulted us. Barry says that is a felony, elder abuse in reverse. We are going to own this duplex by the time the judge is done with you. And the cards, you have to turn them back on. It is financial coercion. I looked at Barry. I looked at Darnell. I didn't say a word. I just stepped back and opened the door wider, inviting them into the damp hallway. Come in, I said. Darnell smirked at Tiffany. See, he is scared. They walked into the living room. They didn't notice the man sitting in the shadows of the dining alcove eating a sandwich. Reggie wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood up. He was 6 feet 4 inches of pure intimidation. He wore a 3-piece charcoal suit that cost more than Barry's car. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a hand. He just adjusted his silk tie and walked into the light. Gentlemen, Reggie rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. Before you file any motions regarding assault, I suggest you review the castle doctrine statutes of this state. Mr. Moore was defending his home against intruders who refused to vacate after being told to leave multiple times. As for the financial assets, there are no assets to restore. A gift is revocable. An allowance is discretionary. Barry stopped cold. He recognized Reggie. Everyone in the legal community knew Reginald Moss. He was the shark that ate other sharks. Mr. Moss, Barry stammered. I didn't know you were counsel on this. I am not just counsel, Reggie said. I am the architect of the trust, and I am here to discuss the matter of the property at 42 Oakview Drive. Darnell laughed nervously. What about my house? It is my house. Reggie reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was yellowed with age. He placed it on the coffee table. Do you recognize this signature, Darnell? Reggie asked. Darnell looked. Of course. That is the tax document Dad made me sign 3 years ago, to protect the asset. Reggie shook his head. No, son. That is a lease agreement, a standard residential lease. Look at line 4, monthly rent payable by tenant $1. Darnell frowned. Yeah, $1. Dad did that so I wouldn't have to pay taxes on a gift. It was smart. It was a lease. Reggie corrected. A month-to-month lease at will. Do you know what at will means, Darnell? It means the landlord can terminate the tenancy at any time for any reason or for no reason at all, provided they give proper notice. But I own it, Darnell insisted, his voice rising in pitch. Dad bought it for me. It was a wedding gift. Show me the deed, Reggie said, holding out his hand. Show me the title. Show me one piece of paper that says Darnell Moore owns anything other than the clothes on his back. Darnell froze. He looked at me. Dad, tell him. I sat down in my armchair. You wanted to play the big shot, Darnell. You wanted to tell your friends you were a real estate mogul. So I let you. I let you sign a lease for $1 so you could feel like a king. But you never read the fine print. You never asked why T&B Holdings was listed as the landlord. You just signed because you saw a free ride. Reggie tapped the paper. Here is the reality check. You are a tenant who has violated the conduct clause of his lease, a tenant who has just become very expensive to maintain. Barry, the cheap lawyer, closed his briefcase. He took a step back. Darnell, you told me you had the deed. You told me it was in your name. I thought it was... Darnell whispered. Reggie pulled out a second document. This one was crisp and new. He handed it to Darnell. This is a notice of rent adjustment, Reggie announced. Effective immediately, the special family discount of $1 per month is revoked due to the termination of the family relationship. The rent is now adjusted to fair market value for a 6,000 square foot estate in a gated community. Darnell read the paper. His hands started to shake. The paper rattled. $8,000, he choked out. $8,000 a month, plus utilities, Reggie added, and landscaping fees, and HOA dues. Those were all covered by Thaddeus as a courtesy. That courtesy has expired. Tiffany snatched the paper from Darnell's hands. Her eyes scanned the numbers. Her face went pale white beneath her makeup. $8,000. We cannot afford $8,000 a month, Darnell. We don't even have $8,000 in the bank. Darnell looked at me. Dad, this is impossible. You know I don't make that kind of money. My salary is... Your salary is irrelevant, Reggie cut him off. You have two options, Mr. Moore. Option 1, you pay the first month's rent plus a security deposit of $16,000 within 24 hours. Option 2, you vacate the premises within 30 days. 30 days! Darnell screamed. Where are we supposed to go? We have furniture. We have a life. That is not my client's concern, Reggie said coldly. If you are not out in 30 days, we will file for eviction, and an eviction on your record will make it very difficult to rent even a studio apartment in this city. Tiffany turned on Darnell. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of panic and revulsion. You told me the house was paid off. You told me your father gave it to us. You lied to me. Darnell reached for her. Baby, listen, I thought... Don't touch me, she hissed, stepping away from him. She looked at the apartment, then at me, then at Darnell. You are broke. You are actually broke. You have nothing. She wasn't looking at her husband anymore. She was looking at a stranger who had tricked her into a life of poverty. The illusion of wealth that Darnell had used to catch her had just evaporated in my living room, leaving behind the smell of damp carpet and the cold, hard truth. Barry, the lawyer, cleared his throat. I think I am going to go. I don't do landlord-tenant disputes. Good luck, Darnell. He walked out, leaving the door open. Reggie packed up his papers. The clock starts now, gentlemen and lady. 30 days. or a check for $24,000 by tomorrow morning. I stood up. I walked to the door and held it open. You heard the man, I said. Get out of my house. And Darnell. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. Don't slam the door on your way out. It is rude. They walked out into the cold afternoon. Tiffany walked fast, putting distance between herself and Darnell. Darnell walked slowly, his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. But it wasn't the world. It was just the weight of his own lies finally crushing him. I closed the door gently and locked it. One down. But the war wasn't over. Tiffany still had a voice, and she was about to use it. I sat in the dark of my kitchen, illuminated only by the blue glow of my tablet. On the screen, my daughter-in-law Tiffany was crying. It was a masterful performance. She was sitting on the edge of a bed in what looked like a cramped hotel room. The lighting was dim, designed to cast shadows under her eyes to make her look exhausted and fragile. Darnell sat beside her, his head bowed, looking like a broken man. The live viewer count in the corner of the screen was climbing rapidly. 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 strangers tuning in to watch the assassination of my character. Guys, I did not want to do this. Tiffany whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sell the lie. We wanted to handle this privately, but we have nowhere else to go. We are currently homeless. My husband's father... She paused to wipe away a dry tear. He kicked us out. On Christmas. Because we refused to let him control us anymore. She looked directly into the camera lens, her blue eyes wide and pleading. It started months ago. He would come over unannounced. He would make comments about my clothes, about how I spent money. He made me feel unsafe in my own home. And when Darnell finally stood up to him, when Darnell finally said no to the toxicity, Thaddeus snapped. He cut off our bank accounts. He stole our cars. He left us on the street with nothing just to teach us a lesson. It is financial abuse, guys. Pure and simple. Darnell nodded slowly. He did not look at the camera. He looked at the floor. Yeah, he mumbled. My dad, he is not the man I thought he was. He has a lot of anger, a lot of resentment toward Tiffany and her family because they come from a different background. He hates that we are happy. The comments section was scrolling so fast it was a blur of white text. Monster. Call the cops. Set up a GoFundMe. I hope that old man rots. Someone posted my address. Someone else posted a Google Maps image of my duplex. The internet mob had been summoned, and they were hungry for blood. I watched Tiffany sob into Darnell's shoulder. I watched my son pat her back, his face a mask of tragic nobility. They were painting a picture of a young interracial couple being persecuted by a bitter, hateful old patriarch. It was a narrative designed to trigger every protective instinct in the audience. It was a lie so audacious, so completely detached from reality that I almost admired the strategy. They knew they could not beat me in court. They knew they could not beat me with money. So they were trying to destroy me in the court of public opinion where evidence did not matter and feelings were facts. I turned off the tablet. The silence returned, but the room felt colder. They had weaponized their failure. They had turned their eviction into a crusade. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. It was empty, but I knew it would not stay that way for long. Darnell had just painted a target on my back and handed the gun to the internet. The first stone came through the front window at 2 in the morning. It sounded like an explosion. The glass shattered inward, spraying shards across the living room carpet I had just dried. I was sitting in my armchair, dozing lightly with a baseball bat across my knees. I didn't jump. I simply opened my eyes and gripped the wood. A brick landed with a heavy thud near the television. Wrapped around it with a rubber band was a piece of notebook paper. I walked to the window, stepping over the glass. I stayed in the shadows, pressing my back against the wall. I peeked through the blinds. A sedan was speeding away, its taillights disappearing around the corner. I picked up the brick and unfolded the note. "Leave her alone, you sick freak," the scrawled handwriting read. I looked at the jagged hole in my window. The winter wind whistled through it, chilling the room. This was the reality Darnell had unleashed. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the history of this country. He knew what happened when a young white woman pointed a finger at a black man and cried wolf. He was banking on it. He was counting on the mob to do what he was too weak to do himself. To break me. To scare me into submission. To make me open the checkbook just to make the terror stop. For the next 3 days I lived under siege. Cars slowed down as they passed my house. People shouted insults from the sidewalk. Someone spray-painted the word predator in red letters across the door of my garage. I went to the grocery store, and the cashier, a girl I had known since she was in diapers, wouldn't look me in the eye. She practically threw my receipt at me, her hands shaking. The rumors were spreading like a virus. I wasn't just the mean landlord anymore. I was a creep, a danger, a menace to society. Reggie called me on the second day. "Thaddeus, you need to make a statement," he urged. "We need to issue a cease and desist. We need to sue for defamation. Silence looks like guilt to these people." "No, Reggie," I said as I swept glass from my porch. "Silence is not guilt. Silence is patience. If I argue, I give them oxygen. If I sue, I look defensive. I need to let them think they are winning. I need them to feel safe enough to make a mistake." "But you are in danger," Thaddeus, Reggie argued. "They are doxing you. They are coming to your home. Let them come," I said. "I upgraded the security system this morning. 4K cameras with audio, motion sensors, reinforced deadbolts. I am not a victim, Reggie. I am a fortress, and fortresses don't complain about the weather. They just weather the storm. I did not go on Facebook to defend myself. I did not post receipts of the millions I had spent on them. Instead, I picked up the phone and called a number that belonged to a man named Silas. Silas was not a lawyer. He was not a banker. He was a former police detective who had lost his badge because he was too good at finding things people wanted to keep hidden. He worked out of a basement office that smelled of cigar smoke and old paper. "Silas," I said when he answered. "I have a job for you. I heard you were famous. Thaddeus." Silas chuckled, his voice like dry leaves. "I saw the video. That daughter-in-law of yours has a future in Hollywood. I need a background check," I said, ignoring the joke. "A deep dive, not on Darnell. I know his sins. I need you to look at Brent and Susan Miller, Tiffany's parents." "The rich folks," Silas asked. "Why?" "They look squeaky clean." "That is the problem," I said. "They look too clean. They fly first class, but they took a taxi home when things got tough. They wear Rolexes, but they didn't offer to pay the catering bill when their daughter was humiliated. Rich people have ego, Silas. If they really had money, Brent would have thrown a credit card down just to show me up. He didn't. He folded." "You think they are faking it?" Silas asked, interested now. "I think my son married into a house of cards," I said. "Darnell thinks they are his ticket to the elite. He thinks they are bailing him out right now. But I have a feeling they are drowning just as fast as he is. I want to know everything. Bankruptcies, liens, lawsuits. Check the property records in California. Find out who really owns their vineyard." "Consider it done," Silas said. "Give me 48 hours. I hung up the phone. I looked at the brick sitting on my coffee table. Darnell thought he was fighting a war of reputation. He thought if he made me look bad enough, I would crumble. He didn't understand that I wasn't fighting for my reputation. I didn't care what strangers thought of me. I was fighting for the truth. And the truth was a slow-acting poison. I walked over to the window and taped a piece of cardboard over the hole. The wind was still blowing, but I felt a fire burning in my gut. They wanted to play the victim. Fine. I would let them play. I would let them build their stage and shine their spotlights. And then when the whole world was watching, I would pull the floor out from under them. I sat back down in my chair and waited. The silence in the house was no longer lonely. It was expectant. The hunter was waiting for the trap to snap. Silas sat in the shadows of my small kitchen, his face illuminated only by the tip of his burning cigar. He did not smile when I poured him a glass of whiskey. He simply slid a thick manila envelope across the scratched surface of my table. It hit the wood with a heavy slap that sounded like a verdict. I picked it up. My hands were steady, but my stomach churned with a familiar dread. I opened the clasp and spilled the contents onto the table. It was not a criminal record. It was a financial autopsy of the Miller family. I picked up the first document. It was a foreclosure notice from a bank in Napa Valley dated 4 years ago. I picked up the next one. A Chapter 7. Bankruptcy filing listing debts totaling $3 million. I read through the credit reports, which were a sea of red flags and missed payments. I looked at the employment history. Brent Miller was not a vineyard owner. He was a tasting room manager who had been fired for inventory theft. Susan Miller had not worked in 20 years. They did not own a sprawling estate on the coast. They lived in a 2-bedroom rental apartment in a complex that had seen better days. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My son had not married into money. He had married into a mirage. Darnell believed he was climbing the social ladder, but he had actually tethered himself to a sinking ship. Brent and Susan were not here to celebrate Christmas. They were here to nest. They were here because they had run out of options, and Darnell, with his leased Mercedes and his big house funded by my money, looked like the perfect mark. They were parasites feeding on a host that was itself a parasite. It was a circle of leeching so pathetic it almost made me laugh. Almost. Silas took a sip of his drink. "They are broke, Thaddeus," he said, his voice raspy. "They have $40 in their joint checking account. They maxed out their last credit card on the plane tickets to get here. They are living on the cash Darnell gives them, which means they are living on your money laundered through your son's delusions." I stared at the papers. This was why Brent didn't pay the catering bill. This was why they took a taxi instead of an Uber. This was why Tiffany was so desperate to keep the house. It wasn't just about status. It was about survival. They had nothing. And now, thanks to me, Darnell had nothing either. I was still staring at the proof of their poverty when a knock came at the door. It was not the pounding of an angry tenant. It was a soft, hesitant tapping. I signaled Silas to stay quiet. I gathered the papers and shoved them back into the envelope, hiding it under a newspaper. I walked to the door. Darnell stood on the porch. He looked terrible. His eyes were sunken and he hadn't shaved in 3 days. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, looking more like the boy I used to take fishing than the man who had slammed a door in my face. He didn't yell, he didn't demand, he just stood there with his hands in his pockets, shivering in the cold. "Can I come in, Dad?" he asked, his voice cracking. "It is cold out here." I stepped aside. He walked in and stood in the hallway, afraid to enter the living room where I had sprayed him with the hose. He looked at the floor. "I know you are angry," he said softly. "I know I messed up. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But you have to understand the pressure I am under. Tiffany's parents expect a certain lifestyle. I was just trying to make you proud, Dad. I wanted you to look at me and see a success." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't offer him a seat. "You have a strange way of showing it. Darnell," I said, "evicting your father on Christmas does not usually scream success." He looked up, his eyes filling with tears. "I know. I am sorry. I am so sorry. But I am here because things have changed. I am not asking for me. I can handle the poverty. I can handle the humiliation. But I cannot let an innocent suffer." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Darnell took a deep breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to me, his hand trembling. "Tiffany is pregnant," he whispered. "You are going to be a grandfather." The world stopped. The anger, the betrayal, the cold calculation of my revenge plan, it all froze in that single second. A grandchild, a baby carrying the Moore name, a piece of Betty continuing on in this world. I felt a crack in the stone wall I had built around my heart. I looked at Darnell, and for the first time in days I saw my son. I saw the fear of a father who cannot provide. I saw the desperation of a man trying to protect his family. I took the paper. It was a printout of an ultrasound, a grainy black and white image showing a tiny gray bean in a sea of static. "She is 8 weeks along," Darnell said, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "We just found out. That is why she has been so emotional. That is why she was so crazy about the house. She is nesting, Dad. She is scared. We are going to have a baby, and we are homeless. We have no car. We have no money for doctors." I stared at the image. I touched the glossy paper with my thumb. A grandchild. I imagined holding a baby again. I imagined teaching a little boy to fish, or a little girl to read. I imagined redemption. Maybe this was the wake-up call Darnell needed. Maybe fatherhood would change him the way it changed me. I looked up at Darnell. He was watching me with an intensity that bordered on hunger. "Please, Dad," he begged. "Don't do it for me. Do it for him, or her. Don't let your grandchild start life in a motel room. Just reinstate the allowance. Just for a few months. Until I can get back on my feet." I felt my resolve crumbling. I was an old man. I was lonely. I wanted a legacy more than I wanted justice. I walked over to the desk and picked up my checkbook. I felt the weight of the pen in my hand. Just one check, I told myself. Just enough to get them a safe place. Just enough to make sure the baby is healthy. I opened the checkbook. I was about to write the date when a thought struck me. A small, nagging voice in the back of my head. The voice of Thaddeus Moore, the businessman, not the father. Trust, but verify. I stopped. I looked at the ultrasound again. There was something about the header. It looked clean. Too clean. Darnell, I said, slowly lowering the pen. Which doctor is she seeing? Darnell blinked. Dr. Evans. At the downtown clinic. He is the best. I knew Dr. Evans. He was a good man. He had treated Betty during her cancer scare years ago. I pulled out my phone. Okay, I said. I will call him. I will pay for her prenatal care directly. I will set up an account with the clinic right now. Darnell's face changed. It was subtle, a flicker of panic behind the tears. You don't have to do that, Dad. Just write the check. It is easier. I don't want to bother the doctor. He is very busy. I dialed the number. I put it on speaker. Darnell took a step forward, reaching for the phone. Dad, stop. You are embarrassing me. The receptionist answered. City Medical Clinic. How can I help you? Hi, this is Thaddeus Moore, I said. My eyes locked on Darnell. I am calling to set up a payment plan for my daughter-in-law, Tiffany Moore. She is a patient of Dr. Evans. She is 8 weeks pregnant. There was a pause. The sound of typing on a keyboard came through the line. One moment, Mr. Moore, let me check our records. Darnell was sweating now. His hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides. Mr. Moore, the receptionist, came back. I have a file for Tiffany Moore, but she has not been seen here in 2 years. Her last visit was for a flu shot. We have no record of a pregnancy or any recent appointments. I stared at Darnell. The ultrasound slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. Are you sure? I asked, my voice hollow. My son is holding an ultrasound image right now. Darnell lunged. He grabbed the phone from my hand and ended the call. It was a different clinic, he shouted, his voice shrill. I got mixed up. It wasn't Evans, it was someone else. I looked at the paper on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. I looked at the patient ID number in the corner. 123456789. I looked at the date. It was today's date, but the timestamp said 4:00 p.m. It was currently 11:00 a.m. I walked over to my computer. I typed ultrasound image 8 weeks into the search bar. The first result was the exact image Darnell had given me. Down to the pixel. It was a stock photo from a medical website. I turned around. The sadness I felt was so deep it felt like drowning. It wasn't anger anymore. It was grief. I was grieving the son I thought I had. I was grieving the grandchild that didn't exist. You lied, I whispered. You lied about a baby. You lied about a life. Darnell didn't apologize. He didn't cry. His face twisted into a mask of ugly entitlement. So what, he spat. You have millions, Dad. You have millions sitting in a safe and you live like a rat. You owe me. If I have to lie to get what is mine, then I will lie. He wasn't a desperate father. He was a con artist. And I was the mark. I pointed to the door. Get out! Darnell laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You are going to regret this, old man. You are going to die alone in this dump and no one will care. I walked toward him. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a hose. I just had the weight of my disappointment and it was heavy enough to crush him. Get out, I repeated, before I call the police and report you for attempted fraud. Darnell glared at me one last time, then turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the silence of my hallway. I looked at the fake ultrasound in my hand. I crumpled it into a tight ball and threw it in the trash. The moment of weakness was gone. The last thread of attachment had been severed. I went back to the kitchen where Silas was waiting. He had poured himself another drink. He heard everything Silas said quietly. I sat down. My hands were steady again. My heart was cold stone. Silas, I said, get the car. We have a land sale to intercept. Darnell thinks he is playing a game. I am about to show him how the board is set. Silas drove the sedan with the steady hands of a man who had spent half his life trailing bad people. We parked across the street from a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where deals were made in hushed tones over stale coffee and greasy eggs. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched my son Darnell pace back and forth on the sidewalk. He looked nervous, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Beside him stood Brent, Tiffany's father. Brent looked different today. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sweaty, frantic energy. He was smoking a cigarette, holding it with trembling fingers. They were waiting for a miracle. They were waiting for a buyer for a piece of land they did not own. Inside the car, Silas handed me an earbud. The audio was crystal clear thanks to the bug Silas had planted in Darnell's jacket pocket during the chaos of the eviction. I heard Brent's voice harsh and demanding. "Stop pacing, Darnell, you look guilty. This guy is a cash buyer. He asks no questions. We get the money, we pay off the immediate debts, and we have breathing room to figure out the next move with your father." Darnell's voice was a whisper of fear. "But Brent, this is a felony, forging his signature on a deed transfer. If he finds out." "He won't find out," Brent snapped. "He is an old man distracted by his own spite. Besides, you are his only heir. It is technically your land anyway. We are just accelerating the timeline. We need this cash, Darnell. Tiffany needs this. Do you want your wife sleeping in a shelter?" I closed my eyes. The justification of the thief. It was always for a good cause. It was always someone else's fault. They had raided my home office during a visit months ago and stolen the deed to a 5-acre plot of commercial land I owned on the north side. It was a prime location slated for a new shopping center. The market value was close to $500,000. Darnell knew this. He knew it was his future legacy. But desperation makes men stupid. A black SUV pulled into the diner parking lot. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a trench coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. This was not a random investor. This was Mr. Stone, my head of commercial acquisitions. He was a man I trusted with my life, and today he was playing the role of a predatory shark. I watched as Darnell and Brent straightened up, putting on their masks of confidence. They led Mr. Stone into a booth by the window. I could see them through the glass. Darnell was talking fast, his hands moving animatedly. Brent was nodding, trying to look like a seasoned partner. Silas adjusted the volume. "So, Mr. Stone," Darnell said, his voice pitching high. "As you can see, the title is clean. 5 acres prime zoning. We are looking for a quick sale. We are motivated. We were thinking 200,000. Mr. Stone didn't even look at the papers. He signaled the waitress for coffee. 200, he said, his voice flat. "That is a fantasy. I did a title search. The owner is listed as Thaddeus Moore. You are Darnell Moore." Darnell swallowed hard. "Thaddeus is my father. He is incapacitated. I have power of attorney. He wants to liquidate assets for his care. Incapacitated. Another lie. Another nail in the coffin." Mr. Stone took a sip of coffee. He looked at Darnell with bored indifference. "Power of attorney is messy. Probate is messy. I don't like messy. I like clean, fast, and cheap. If I buy this, I am taking a risk. Your father could wake up tomorrow and sue me. He won't." Brent interjected. "He is very sick." Mr. Stone leaned forward. 50,000. Cash. Today." Darnell gasped. 50. The land is worth 500. Mr. Stone shrugged. "Then list it with a broker. Wait 6 months, pay commissions, pay taxes, or sign the paper right now and walk away with a bag of cash. Take it or leave it." I saw Darnell look at Brent. I saw the silent conversation between them. They were drowning. They didn't have 6 months. They didn't have 6 days. They needed money now to maintain the illusion of their lives. 50 is too low. Darnell tried one last time. "Can you do 75? 50, Mr. Stone repeated. "And you sign the deed right now." Thaddeus Moore's signature. "Not yours as power of attorney. I want the owner's signature. I don't care who holds the pen." It was a trap within a trap. If Darnell signed as power of attorney, it was fraud. But if he forged my signature, it was forgery, identity theft, and real estate fraud. It was a prison sentence on a piece of paper. "Do it," Brent hissed. 50,000 is enough to get an apartment and pay off the credit cards. Just do it." Darnell picked up the pen. I held my breath. Part of me, the father who had taught him to ride a bike, wanted to scream through the glass. I wanted to run in there and slap the pen from his hand. I wanted to save him from crossing the line from ungrateful son to felon. But I stayed in the car. Darnell had made his choice. He had chosen the parents who encouraged his worst instincts over the father who demanded his best. I watched his hand move across the document. He didn't hesitate. He signed Thaddeus Moore with a flourish imitating the signature he had seen on my checks for 30 years. He pushed the paper across the table. Mr. Stone checked the signature. He nodded. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick brown envelope. He placed it on the table. "Count it if you want," Stone said. Darnell grabbed the envelope. He opened it just enough to see the stacks of $100 bills. His eyes lit up with a greed that was painful to witness. He didn't count it. He just shoved it into his jacket. "Pleasure doing business," Mr. Stone said, standing up. Darnell and Brent practically ran out of the diner. They were high on the adrenaline of the crime. They high-fived in the parking lot. They were laughing. They thought they had just pulled off the heist of the century. They thought they had outsmarted the senile old man. "I got it," Darnell shouted, getting into the passenger seat of Brent's rental car. 50 grand. We are back in the game." They drove away, tires screeching, leaving behind the evidence of their destruction. Mr. Stone walked out of the diner. He crossed the street and leaned into my window. He handed me the deed. The ink was still wet. The signature was a perfect forgery. He took the bait, Stone said quietly. "We have him on video inside the diner. The notary was my cousin. She witnessed the forgery and notarized it, knowing it was a sting. You have him, Thaddeus. He just sold your land for 10 cents on the dollar and committed a Class B felony to do it." I took the paper. It felt heavy. It wasn't just a deed anymore. It was an arrest warrant waiting to be filed. "And the cash?" I asked, Counterfeit Stone said. "High-quality theatrical props, good enough to fool a desperate man in a dark diner. But the moment he tries to deposit it or spend it, he is going to have a very bad day." I nodded. "Keep the file secure, Stone. We aren't using it yet. Let him feel rich for a few hours. Let him spend the money in his head. The fall will be harder when he realizes he sold his soul for monopoly money." Silas started the engine. "Where to, boss?" he asked. I looked at the forged signature one last time. It looked like my name, but it felt like a goodbye letter. "To the courthouse," I said. "They are going to file for guardianship tomorrow. I want to be ready. They think I am the prey. It is time to show them I am the hunter. Darnell thinks he just bought his freedom. He has no idea he just signed his confession. The noose is tight, Silas. Now we just let him kick the chair away." The summons arrived at my door like a thief in the night. It wasn't mailed. It was hand-delivered by a process server who wouldn't look me in the eye. I opened the thick packet of documents on my kitchen table. Petition for emergency guardianship. The words were bold and accusatory. Below them was a narrative that transformed my life into a horror story of senility and danger. Darnell claimed I was suffering from advanced dementia. He cited the irrational eviction on Christmas Day as a psychotic break. He claimed I was hoarding assets and living in squalor despite having the means to live better, a clear sign of cognitive decline, according to the petition. But the centerpiece of his argument was a USB drive taped to the inside cover. I plugged it into my computer. A video file opened. It was a montage, a digital Frankenstein's monster of my life. There was a clip of me in the backyard smashing an old toilet with a sledgehammer. Darnell had filmed it 2 years ago when I was remodeling the bathroom, but the clip was edited to make it look like I was destroying furniture in a rage. There was audio of me shouting at the television during a football game, but the video showed me yelling at an empty room. It was a masterpiece of manipulation designed to make a 70-year-old man look like a violent, confused menace. I watched it twice. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This was their nuclear option. They couldn't get the money by asking. They couldn't get it by stealing. So now they were going to get it by erasing me, by turning Thaddeus Moore the man into Thaddeus Moore the ward of the state. 2 hours later, a knock came at the door. It wasn't the timid knock of a friend. It was the authoritative pounding of the law. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a paramedic's uniform holding a clipboard. "Mr. Thaddeus Moore," the lead officer asked. He kept his hand near his belt, not on his gun, but close enough to be a warning. "I am Thaddeus," I said, stepping back to let them see I was unarmed and calm. "Sir, we have a court order for an emergency psychiatric evaluation," the officer said, handing me a paper. "Your family has filed a petition stating you are an immediate danger to yourself and others. We need you to come with us to St. Jude's Behavioral Health Center." I looked past them to the street. Darnell's rental car was parked half a block away. I saw him watching through the windshield, his face pale and anxious. He wasn't gloating. He looked terrified. He knew this was the point of no return. If this failed, he was done. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't resist. That was what they wanted. They wanted the angry old man from the video. "I understand, officer," I said, my voice steady. "Let me get my jacket. It is cold outside." The officer looked surprised. Most people in this situation fight scream or cry. I just walked to the closet, put on my coat, and walked out the door. I locked it behind me. As they led me to the ambulance, I saw Darnell sink lower in his seat. He expected a scene. He expected chaos. Instead, he got dignity. And dignity is the one thing a liar cannot fight. St. Jude's was a sterile place smelling of bleach and despair. They took my belt, my shoelaces, and my phone. They put me in a room with white walls and a heavy steel door. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. I knew the game. I had to be patient. Dr. Vance entered the room an hour later. He was a small man with nervous eyes and a clipboard he held like a shield. He didn't look like a healer. He looked like a man with gambling debts. I knew his type. Darnell hadn't picked him at random. "Mr. Moore," Dr. Vance said, sitting on the chair opposite me. "I am here to assess your cognitive state. Your son is very worried about you. He says you have been exhibiting aggressive behavior and paranoia." I looked at him, dead. I didn't blink. "My son is a thief, doctor," I said quietly. "He forged my signature on a land deed yesterday. He owes $100,000 to loan sharks. He isn't worried about my mind. He is worried about my wallet." Dr. Vance scribbled something on his pad. "Paranoid delusions regarding family finances," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. I leaned forward. "It isn't a delusion if I have the receipts, doctor." Vance stopped writing. He looked up. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. "Mr. Moore, we have video evidence of you destroying property. We have testimony from your daughter-in-law that you threatened them with a weapon, a garden hose," I corrected, "after they refused to leave my home. That is trespassing, doctor, not dementia." Vance stood up. He walked to the window, avoiding my gaze. "Look, Thaddeus, can I call you Thaddeus? Cooperation is key here. If you agree to a temporary conservatorship, we can make this comfortable. A nice facility, good food. Your son just wants to manage the heavy lifting for you." I smiled a cold, humorless smile. "How much did he pay you, doctor? Or did he just promise to pay you once he gets access to my accounts?" Vance turned red. "That is an accusation, Mr. Moore, a symptom of your condition." "It is a question," I said. "And here is another one. Do you know what the penalty is for medical fraud? For falsifying a diagnosis to facilitate elder abuse, because my lawyer Reginald Moss is currently filing a subpoena for your bank records." Vance dropped his pen. It clattered on the linoleum floor. "Reginald Moss," he whispered. "The shark," I said. "He is on his way, and he is bringing the FBI. You have about 10 minutes to decide if you want to be a witness or a defendant." Vance looked at me. He saw the calm in my eyes. He saw the intelligence. He realized he had been sold a lie by a desperate man. He picked up his pen. His hands were shaking. I need to check your vitals," Vance stammered, backing toward the door. "I will be right back." He ran out of the room. I sat back on the bed and closed my eyes. I wasn't trapped. I was exactly where I needed to be. The trap had snapped shut, but Darnell didn't realize his leg was the one caught in the teeth. I waited for the sound of Reggie's voice in the hallway. It wouldn't be long now. The first night in the psychiatric hold was a test of endurance designed to break the strongest of men. The room was freezing and the lights hummed with a low-frequency buzz that drilled into my skull. They had taken my watch, so I measured time by the rhythmic rounds of the staff. At 9 o'clock sharp, the heavy steel door unlatched. A nurse walked in. Her name tag read Brenda. She was a large woman with forearms like tree trunks and eyes devoid of any warmth. She held a small paper cup in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. "Mr. Moore," she said, her voice flat and bored. "Time for your medication. Dr. Vance prescribed a sedative to help with your agitation." I sat up on the edge of the cot. "I am not agitated, Brenda. I am patiently waiting for my lawyer. I do not need medication." Brenda didn't blink. She took a step closer, invading my personal space. "It is not a request. You take the pills, or we inject you. Those are the house rules for involuntary holds. If you fight us, we strap you down." "Do you want to be strapped down, Mr. Moore?" I looked at the cup. 2 blue pills. Thorazine. I knew what it did. It was a chemical lobotomy. It turned lions into lambs and clear thinkers into drooling vegetables. If I took this, I would lose my clarity. If I lost my clarity, I would lose the war. But if I fought her, she would call the orderlies and they would force a needle into my vein. I had to be smarter. I had to be the fox, not the bear. Fine, I said, forcing my shoulders to slump in defeat. I will take them. I just want to sleep. She handed me the cup and the water. She watched me like a hawk. I tossed the pills into my mouth. I took a large gulp of water. I swallowed loud enough for her to hear the gulp. I opened my mouth. I lifted my tongue. Good, Brenda said. She turned to mark her clipboard. In that split second, I coughed into my hand, covering the action with a spasm of my chest. The pills, which I had tucked into the pocket of my cheek, slid into my palm. I dropped my hand to my side and slid the pills under the mattress in one fluid motion. It was a trick I learned from a man in the trenches of Vietnam 50 years ago. Brenda turned back. "Sleep tight, Mr. Moore." She left, locking the door with a heavy clank. I waited 10 minutes until her footsteps faded down the hall. Then I retrieved the dissolving pills and flushed them down the toilet. My mind was still mine. I lay back on the hard mattress and waited. I knew Darnell would not be able to stay away. He needed to see me broken. The opportunity came at 2 a.m. The hospital wing was silent except for the distant moaning of a troubled patient down the hall. I heard the electronic beep of the keypad on my door. I squeezed my eyes shut and regulated my breathing, making it slow and heavy. I had to look like the drugs had done their work. The door opened. I heard the click of dress shoes and the squeak of rubber soles. "He is out cold," Dr. Vance whispered. "We gave him a double dose. He won't wake up for 12 hours. "Good." It was Darnell's voice. It sounded shaky but eager. "Can we keep him like this?" Vance sighed. "We can keep him sedated for the 72-hour observation period. But after that, we need a judge to sign off on a long-term commitment. That requires a hearing." "I don't want a hearing," Darnell hissed. "My father is slippery. If he gets in front of a judge sober, he will talk his way out of it. I need him incompetent, Vance. I need him drooling. I need you to write that he has advanced dementia with violent tendencies." "That is a big risk," Darnell Vance said, his voice dropping lower. "That is fraud. If the medical board finds out, I lose my license. I go to jail." "You won't go to jail," Darnell said, "because you will be rich. Once I have power of attorney, I get access to the T&B Holdings accounts. There is millions in there, Vance. I will wire you $20,000 the day the papers are signed. 20,000 cash. I lay there, my body rigid with rage. My own son was bartering my sanity for the price of a used car. He was standing over his father, bargaining for a chemical lobotomy so he could pay off his gambling debts. 20,000 is low, Vance countered. This is high risk. Make it 30. Fine 30. Darnell agreed too quickly. Just keep him under. Do not let him make any phone calls. Do not let him see a lawyer. Just cook his brain until he signs the papers. We have a deal, Vance said. They shook hands. Look. I heard the rustle of fabric. They turned to leave. They thought they were safe in the dark room with a drugged old man. They didn't know that taped to the underside of the metal bed frame right near their knees was a tiny voice-activated digital recorder. I had sewn it into the lining of my coat months ago for business meetings, and I had transferred it to the bed the moment I arrived. It had a 10-hour battery life. It caught every word, every negotiation, every conspiracy. Darnell walked to the side of the bed. I felt his breath on my face. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. "You should have just given me the money. Now you lose everything." He walked out. The door locked. I opened my eyes in the darkness. I wasn't losing everything. I had just won. I retrieved the recorder and checked the small red light. It blinked once. Evidence secured. Now I just had to survive until the clock ran out. The next morning passed in a blur of feigned lethargy. I shuffled when they told me to shuffle. I stared blankly on the wall when they brought me breakfast. I spat out 3 more doses of pills. I was playing the part of the broken man perfectly. At the 48th hour exactly, the door to my room didn't just open. It was thrown open with such force it banged against the concrete wall. Dr. Vance stood there, his face pale as a sheet. Behind him was a wall of black suits. Reginald Moss stepped into the room. He looked like an avenging angel in a pinstripe suit. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 4 federal agents wearing windbreakers that said FBI. "Get away from my client," Reggie roared, pointing a finger at Vance. "Mr. Moore," Vance stammered, backing up. We were just assessing. You were holding a United States citizen against his will based on falsified medical evidence," Reggie declared, his voice booming through the ward. He held up a piece of paper with a gold seal. This is a writ of habeas corpus signed by a federal judge an hour ago. It demands the immediate release of Thaddeus Moore. And this," he pointed to the agents, "is the cavalry." Two agents moved past Reggie. They grabbed Dr. Vance. One of them spun him around and slammed him against the wall. "Dr. Alan Vance, you are under arrest for medical fraud, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and violation of the RICO Act," the agent recited. Vance screamed. "Darnell made me do it. He paid me. I have the texts." Reggie walked over to me. He looked at my hospital gown and my bare feet. He looked furious. "Are you okay, Thaddeus?" he asked, his voice softening. I reached under the mattress and pulled out the tiny recorder. I handed it to him. "I am fine, Reggie," I said, my voice clear and sharp. "I have the confession. They negotiated the price of my brain, $30,000. Reggie took the recorder. He smiled a smile that was all teeth. "Let's get you out of here, Thaddeus. I have a suit waiting in the car, and we have a court date to keep." I stood up. I walked out of that room and down the hallway. I passed nurses who looked terrified. I passed patients who looked confused. I walked out the double doors into the sunlight. The air tasted sweet. Darnell had tried to bury me in a hole of madness. Instead, he had just dug his own grave, and I was holding the shovel. I sat in the executive suite of T&B Holdings on the 30th floor, a space Darnell had never seen because he believed his father was unworthy of high-rise views. The city spread out below me, a grid of steel and ambition that I had helped build. On my desk sat a stack of contracts. They were the lifeblood of Visionary Strategies, the boutique marketing firm where Darnell held the title of senior vice president. He believed he had secured his position there through his charisma and business acumen. He bragged constantly about his six-figure retainer and his corner office. He did not know that Visionary Strategies was a shell company I had acquired 5 years ago specifically to give him a playground. I was his only client. I was his only revenue stream. Every dollar he thought he earned was an allowance I paid him to feel important. I picked up my fountain pen. It felt heavy and cold. I looked at the termination order in front of me. It was a simple document. It stated that T&B Holdings was exercising its right to cancel all service agreements with Visionary Strategies effective immediately due to a conflict of interest and reputational risk. The cause listed was Darnell Moore. I signed my name. The ink was black and permanent. I handed the document to my assistant. "File it," I said, "and notify the building manager to initiate the lockout procedure for their suite." I turned to my computer monitors. I had access to the internal servers of Visionary Strategies. I watched the digital slaughter happen in real time. At 9 o'clock, the cancellation email hit the inbox of the agency's CEO, a man named Mr. Sterling, who I paid to babysit my son. At 9:05, the company bank accounts, which were linked to my corporate treasury, froze. The flow of money stopped instantly. It was like cutting the oxygen line to a diver. Darnell was sitting in his office, probably shopping online for watches he could no longer afford, unaware that the air in the room was already running out. I felt a grim satisfaction. He had told me I was no longer family. I was simply granting his wish by removing the family subsidy he had lived on for a decade. Across town, the collapse was swift and brutal. I had a live feed from the security cameras in the Visionary Strategies lobby. I saw Mr. Sterling storm out of his office, his face pale. He marched straight to Darnell's glass-walled sanctuary. I could not hear the words, but the body language was violent. Sterling slammed the termination notice on Darnell's desk. Darnell stood up, knocking over his expensive ergonomic chair. He was waving his hands, shouting, trying to explain. "But there is no explaining away the fact that you are the poison pill that killed the company." Sterling pointed to the door. He didn't give Darnell time to pack a box. He didn't give him time to say goodbye to the secretary he treated like a servant. Security guards appeared flanking Darnell like he was a criminal. They marched him through the bullpen. The other employees watched in silence. They knew. They knew Darnell was a fraud who took credit for their work, and now they were watching him get flushed. Darnell looked terrified. He looked at his phone, probably trying to call me, but his number was blocked. He was dragged to the elevator and shoved inside. Down in the lobby, the building manager was already taping a bright orange notice to the glass doors of the office. Seized for non-payment. The locks were being changed by a locksmith I had dispatched an hour ago. Darnell stumbled out onto the sidewalk. It was raining, a cold gray drizzle that soaked his suit. He stood there looking up at the building he thought he ruled. He had no job. He had no office. He had no income. He checked his pockets, realizing he had left his car keys on his desk, but he couldn't go back up. And even if he could, he didn't have a car to drive anymore. He was just a man on a sidewalk with nothing but the wet clothes on his back. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I placed them. In a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, Tiffany sat on a lumpy mattress staring at her phone. She had seen the news alert. A local business blog had already picked up the story. Local marketing firm collapses after losing key investor. Darnell's name was mentioned as the cause. Tiffany felt the walls closing in. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and mildew filled her nose. This was not the life she was promised. She had married Darnell for the penthouse views and the black cards, not for Motel 6 and eviction notices. She looked at her wedding ring. It was a diamond I had paid for. She twisted it on her finger, realizing it might be the only asset she had left. She made a decision then. It wasn't a decision born of love or loyalty. It was the survival instinct of a rat on a sinking ship. If Darnell was broke, he was useless to her. She unlocked her phone and opened a hidden folder of contacts. She scrolled past Darnell. She scrolled past her parents. She stopped at a name she hadn't dialed in years. Chad. Chad was her college boyfriend, a man she had dumped because he wasn't ambitious enough. But rumors said Chad had recently come into a large inheritance. Rumors that I had carefully planted through mutual acquaintances over the last week. Chad was not an heir. Chad was an actor I had hired from a local theater troupe. I had set him up in a luxury suite at the Ritz-Carlton and given him a wardrobe of Italian suits. He was bait. Shiny, expensive bait designed to catch a gold digger. Tiffany typed a message. "Hey stranger, long time. I heard you are in town. I would love to catch up." I watched the message appear on the cloned phone I had given to the actor. I sat in my apartment sipping tea. She didn't wait for Darnell to come home and explain. She didn't wait to comfort him. She saw the ship going down and she immediately looked for a lifeboat. I picked up my burner phone and texted the actor. She bit. "Reel her in. Invite her to the charity gala tonight. Tell her you need a +1. The reply from Tiffany came 30 seconds after the invite. "I would love to. Darnell and I are having issues. It would be nice to be around someone with class again." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She was walking right into the lion's den. Darnell was losing his career and his wife was already putting on her makeup to meet another man. They deserved each other. But tonight they would both get exactly what they deserved in front of the entire city. The stage was set for the final act. The Metropolitan Charity Gala was the event of the season. It was held in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, a place dripping with crystal chandeliers and the scent of old money. Tickets cost $5,000 a plate. I was the diamond sponsor, though my name wasn't on the program. I sat at a table in the shadowed back corner, invisible to the glitterati, sipping sparkling water and watching the doors. At 8:30, Darnell and Tiffany arrived. They didn't have tickets. They didn't have an invitation. But desperation makes people bold. They had slipped in through the service entrance, blending in with a group of late-arriving musicians. Darnell wore a tuxedo that fit poorly, likely rented or borrowed, and Tiffany wore a dress that was too flashy for the room, a desperate attempt to be seen. They weren't here for charity. They were hunting. Darnell needed a new investor to save his crumbling career, and Tiffany was scanning the room for Chad, the rich ex-boyfriend I had dangled in front of her. They moved through the crowd like sharks in a goldfish bowl, their eyes darting, their smiles tight and predatory. I watched Darnell corner a venture capitalist near the bar, talking fast, his hands waving. The man looked uncomfortable, inching away. Tiffany was texting furiously, looking for her golden parachute. They looked pathetic. They looked like exactly what they were, imposters in a world they hadn't earned. The lights dimmed. The murmuring crowd fell silent as the host took the stage to welcome everyone. This was Darnell's moment. I saw him push past a waiter adjusting his tie. He wasn't going to wait for an introduction. He was going to seize the spotlight. He marched up the stairs to the stage, grabbed the microphone from the stunned host and tapped it twice. The feedback screeched through the speakers, making everyone wince. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Darnell announced, his voice booming and slightly slurred. "I am Darnell Moore. Many of you know me as a successful marketing executive, but tonight I stand before you as a victim of a cruel and vindictive father who has stripped me of my livelihood and my home because he is jealous of my success." A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. People whispered, pointing. "Who is this? Is this part of the show?" Darnell continued, gaining momentum. My father, Thaddeus Moore, is a tyrant. He hates that I married a woman of class. He hates that I have ambition. He has cut me off, left me destitute, and tried to destroy my reputation. But I am here to ask for your help. I am looking for partners who believe in innovation, who believe in family values, unlike my father. He paused for effect, waiting for applause or sympathy. He got silence. Uncomfortable, heavy silence. And then behind him, the massive projection screen that was supposed to show images of starving children flickered to life. But it wasn't a charity video. It was grainy footage from a hotel room camera. The room was unmistakable, the Ritz-Carlton suite I had rented for Chad. The video showed Tiffany Darnell's wife sitting on the edge of the bed holding a glass of wine, laughing with a man who was not her husband. "I am so glad I called you, Chad." Tiffany's voice rang out clear as a bell over the ballroom speakers. "Darnell is a loser. He is broke. He tricked me into marrying him. I need a man with real money, a man like you." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shocked laughter. Darnell turned around, staring at the screen in horror. He saw his wife, the woman he was defending, betraying him in high definition. But the show wasn't over. The video cut to a black screen and audio began to play. It was a recording from the bug I had planted in Darnell's pocket weeks ago. "I can't stand her parents." Darnell's voice sneered loud and ugly. "Brent and Susan are leeches, white trash wrapped in expensive clothes. As soon as I get my dad's money, I am kicking them to the curb. They smell like desperation." The audio cut off. The lights came up. Darnell stood frozen on stage, the microphone dangling from his hand. He looked out into the crowd. He saw Tiffany standing near the bar, her face a mask of terror. He saw Brent and Susan, who had somehow managed to sneak in too, staring at him with pure hatred. "You ungrateful little worm," Brent shouted, charging toward the stage. He wasn't a fighter, but rage gave him speed. He tackled Darnell, knocking him into the podium. They rolled on the floor, a tangle of limbs and tuxedos, punching and cursing. Tiffany screamed, trying to run, but she tripped on her dress and fell. The guests, the elite of the city, were filming everything on their phones. It was chaos. It was ruin. It was perfect. I stood up from my table in the back. I adjusted my jacket. I didn't need to say a word. The truth had spoken for me. I walked toward the exit as security swarmed the stage to break up the fight. Darnell was finished. Tiffany was exposed. And the Miller family was at war with itself. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the heat of their destruction behind me. Protocol Z was complete. Now it was just a matter of cleaning up the debris. 3 days after the charity gala, the city was buried under a sheet of freezing rain. The streets were empty, and the wind howled through the alleyways of the South Side. I sat in the darkness of my living room, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the blinds. I was not asleep. I was waiting. I knew my son. I knew that when a man is stripped of his pride, his money, and his reputation, he does not reflect on his sins. He lashes out. He seeks a quick fix. And Darnell knew exactly where I kept my ledger. He remembered the steel safe behind the painting of the lighthouse. He believed that safe was filled with stacks of cash, the millions I had hidden from him. He did not understand that the true value was in the paper trail, not the paper currency. At 2 in the morning, a shadow moved across the front window. It was a clumsy, stumbling shadow. Darnell was drunk. I could hear him muttering to himself outside, cursing the cold, cursing the ice, cursing me. He was holding a bottle of cheap whiskey in one hand and something that glinted in the streetlight in the other. It was a long, serrated kitchen knife. He had not come to talk. He had come to take. He had reached the end of the road. His friends had abandoned him. His wife was at war with him. His in-laws were revealed as frauds. He had nowhere to go but back to the father he despised, not to beg for forgiveness, but to demand what he felt was his birthright. I heard the scratch of metal on the lock. He was trying to pick it, but his hands were shaking too much. He grew frustrated. He kicked the door once, twice, 3 times. The wood held. I had reinforced the frame days ago, anticipating this exact moment. He screamed a sound of pure animal rage. Then came the sound of shattering glass. He had used the handle of the knife to smash the small window pane near the latch. He reached in, unlocking the deadbolt from the inside. The door swung open, crashing against the wall. Darnell stumbled into the hallway. He brought the smell of the storm with him, mixed with the stench of sweat and alcohol. He didn't call out my name. He didn't check to see if I was awake. He moved with a singular, destructive purpose. He marched into the living room, kicking over a small table where I kept my reading glasses. The lamp crashed to the floor, the bulb popping with a sharp hiss. "Where is it?" he slurred, swinging the knife through the empty air. "Where is the money, old man? I know you have it. You have millions. You owe me." He walked to the wall. He ripped the painting of the lighthouse down. The canvas tore. The frame splintered. He threw it behind him, not caring that it was a gift from his mother, painted by her own hands 20 years ago. He saw the safe. His eyes lit up with a feral greed. He dropped the whiskey bottle. It shattered on the floor, soaking the rug. He grabbed the dial of the safe with both hands, spinning it frantically left and right as if force alone could open the tumblers. "Open up," he screamed, banging his fist against the steel door. "Open up, you piece of junk!" When the safe didn't yield, he turned his rage on the room. He slashed the sofa cushions with the knife, ripping the fabric, sending stuffing into the air like snow. He swept my books off the shelves. He smashed a vase that had been in the family for generations. He was destroying the only home he had ever truly known, trying to find a fortune that he would have just squandered in a week. It was heartbreaking. It was pathetic. It was the final proof that the son I loved was gone, consumed by the monster of his own entitlement. He turned toward the hallway, breathing heavily, the knife held low at his side. "I am going to wake him up," he muttered. "I am going to put this knife to his throat and make him open it. He is going to give me everything." He took a step toward my bedroom. Click. The sound was loud in the sudden silence. It was the sound of a heavy industrial light switch being thrown. The overhead floodlights I had installed in the corners of the room blazed to life, blindingly bright. Darnell threw his hands up to shield his eyes, dropping the knife in his surprise. It clattered to the hardwood floor. "Hello, son," I said. I was sitting in my armchair in the corner of the room. I hadn't moved an inch. I was wearing my best suit. My hands were rested calmly on the arms of the chair, but I was not alone. Sitting on a folding chair next to me was a man in a full uniform, Chief of Police Marcus Holloway. Marcus and I went back 40 years. We played chess on Tuesdays. He was drinking a cup of tea. Darnell blinked, trying to focus. His eyes adjusted to the light. He saw me. He saw the chief. He saw the knife on the floor between us. He looked at his hands, which were still raised in a defensive posture. He looked at the destruction around him. The torn sofa, the broken lamp, the shattered vase. "Dad," Darnell whispered, his voice trembling. I lost my keys. I was just looking for—" "Stop," Marcus said. His voice was deep and authoritative. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He stood up slowly, placing his tea on the side table. "Darnell Moore, you are currently standing in a private residence you entered by force. There is a weapon on the floor. There is extensive property damage, and you are intoxicated." Darnell looked at Marcus, then at me. "Dad, tell him. Tell him I live here. Tell him it is a misunderstanding." I looked at my son. I looked at the boy who used to run into my arms when he scraped his knee. I looked at the man who had just threatened to cut my throat for money. "You don't live here, Darnell," I said, my voice flat. "You were evicted. You received the legal notice. You are trespassing. You are armed. And you just attempted to rob me." "No," Darnell cried, dropping to his knees. "I wasn't going to hurt you. I just needed the money. The loan sharks, Dad, they are going to kill me. I needed the cash in the safe." "There is no cash in the safe," I said. "Just paper. Just the proof of everything I gave you and everything you wasted." Marcus walked over to Darnell. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked as he snapped them onto Darnell's wrists. "Darnell Moore, you are under arrest for breaking and entering assault with a deadly weapon and attempted robbery," Marcus recited. "You have the right to remain silent." Darnell began to sob. It was an ugly sound, a mixture of fear and self-pity. "Dad, please. Don't let them take me. I am your son." I stood up. I walked over to him. I looked down at the mess he had made of my life and his own. "I waited for you, Darnell," I said quietly. "I sat here in the dark and I prayed you wouldn't come. I prayed you would go to a shelter or call a friend or just sleep in your car. I prayed you would hit rock bottom and start to climb, but you didn't. You came here to take. You came here to hurt. You made your choice." I nodded to Marcus. "Take him." Marcus hauled Darnell to his feet. They walked toward the door, past the broken glass and the ruined painting. Darnell looked back at me one last time, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad," he screamed as Marcus pushed him out into the rain. "Dad, help me." I watched the door close. I heard the siren of the patrol car waiting outside. I was alone again in my bright, ruined apartment. I walked over to the painting of the lighthouse. I picked it up and tried to smooth the torn canvas. My hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the terrible grief of doing what had to be done. I had caught the thief. I had stopped the threat, but the victory tasted like ashes in my mouth. The county detention center was a concrete box designed to strip a man of his humanity, and it was doing a thorough job on my son. The air inside tasted of stale bologna and industrial disinfectant, a smell that stuck to the back of your throat and refused to leave. I sat in a small interrogation room, the metal table bolted to the floor, cold under my fingertips. I was not there as a visitor. I was there as the victim of the crime. Chief Marcus had arranged for 10 minutes of private time before Darnell was transferred to the general population. I wore my Sunday suit, the same one I had worn on Christmas when he kicked me out. I wanted him to see exactly who he had thrown away. The heavy steel door buzzed and clanked open. A guard stepped in, leading a man in a bright orange jumpsuit. His wrists were shackled to his waist and his ankles were chained together, forcing him to shuffle in small, humiliating steps. It took me a moment to recognize him. The Darnell who had stood on his porch swirling scotch and looking down on me was gone. In his place was a terrified boy with hollow eyes and skin the color of ash. He hadn't showered. His hair was matted. He smelled of fear and unwashed bodies. The guard pushed him into the chair opposite me and locked the door, leaving us alone in the humming silence of the room. Darnell did not look at me. He stared at his hands resting on the metal table, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. He was shaking. The chains rattled softly, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. "Hello, Darnell," I said. My voice was not loud. It did not echo. It just filled the space between us. He looked up then. His eyes were red and swollen. When he saw me, he didn't show anger or defiance. He collapsed. It wasn't a physical collapse, but a spiritual one. His shoulders slumped and his face crumpled into a mask of absolute misery. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, you have to get me out of here. It is a nightmare. There are animals in there, Dad. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. Please, I will do anything. Just pay the bail. I know you have the money." I leaned back in my chair watching him. I remembered him as a toddler crying because he dropped his ice cream. I had bought him another one then. I had fixed it. But I could not fix this. I could not buy another ice cream cone to replace the integrity he had thrown away. "I am not here to bail you out, Darnell," I said. "The robbery charge is a felony. The assault with a deadly weapon is a felony. There is no bail for a man caught holding a knife in his father's living room." Darnell began to weep. It was a wet, ugly sound. He slid out of his chair. The chains pulled tight, but he managed to get to his knees on the dirty linoleum floor. He pressed his forehead against the edge of the table right near my hand. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am so sorry, Dad. I didn't mean it. I was drunk. I was scared. I wasn't going to hurt you. I swear. I just needed help. Stand up," I commanded. He didn't move. He stayed on his knees, groveling. "It wasn't my fault," he whispered into the metal. "It was them. It was Tiffany. She made me crazy, Dad. She spent so much money. Every day it was something new. A bag, a trip, a dinner. She said if I didn't provide, she would leave me. She said I wasn't a real man if I couldn't buy her the world. I was just trying to keep her happy." I listened to him blame the woman he had vowed to protect. A minute ago, he was a predator. Now he was a victim. And Brent, he continued the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Her father is the devil. He told me you were holding out on me. He told me I deserved that money. He put the ideas in my head, Dad. He said we should sell the land. He said you wouldn't notice. I didn't want to do it. I told him it was wrong. But he pressured me. He said we needed the cash to pay off the caterer. He said you owed it to us." I felt a surge of disgust so potent it tasted like bile. Even here in chains, he could not take responsibility. He was willing to throw his wife and his father-in-law into the fire just to see if it would burn down the prison walls. He was a coward, a weak, spineless man who would sell anyone to save his own skin. "So you are saying you are innocent?" I asked, my voice flat. "You are saying Tiffany and Brent forced you to take a knife and break into my house?" "Yes," Darnell cried, looking up at me with hope in his eyes. "Yes, Dad. They manipulated me. I am the victim here. Please tell the police. Tell them I am a good son. Tell them to let me go home." I reached into my jacket pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a document. It was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. I unfolded it and smoothed it out on the table. It was a plea agreement drafted by Reggie and approved by the district attorney an hour ago. "Get up, Darnell," I said again. He scrambled back into his chair, wiping his nose on his shoulder. He looked at the paper. "What is this?" he asked. "This is your lifeline," I said. "This is the only help you are going to get from me." I pointed to the paragraphs. "I have the deed, Darnell, the deed to the 5-acre commercial lot, the one you signed yesterday in the diner, the one you sold for $50,000 in counterfeit cash to an undercover agent working for my security team." Darnell's face went white. "You know about that. I know everything I said. I have you on video forging my signature. That is forgery. That is fraud. That is grand larceny. That alone carries 10 years. Add the break-in and the assault and you are looking at 20 years in a state penitentiary. You will be an old man when you get out, Darnell. You will be older than I am now." He started to hyperventilate. No. Dad, please." I tapped the paper. "Here is the deal. You are going to plead guilty to the forgery. You are going to accept a sentence of 2 years in a minimum security facility. In exchange, I will drop the charges for the break-in and the assault. I will tell the DA that it was a domestic dispute and that I do not wish to press charges for the knife." 2 years, Darnell whispered. 2 years is a long time. It is a gift, I snapped. "It is mercy you do not deserve. But there is a condition." I pushed a pen toward him. "You are going to testify against Brent Miller. You are going to tell the police exactly how he helped you plan the sale. You are going to tell them how he encouraged the forgery. You are going to give them dates, times, and conversations. You are going to hand him over on a silver platter." Darnell looked at the pen. He looked at me. He looked at the door leading to the cells. He realized his options were zero. He could protect the father-in-law who had called him a worm, or he could save himself 18 years of his life. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask about Tiffany. He didn't ask about loyalty. He grabbed the pen with shaking hands. "I will do it," he said, his voice thick with relief and malice. "I will tell them everything. Brent is going to rot. He pushed me to do it. It was all his idea. He signed his name." The scratch of the pen on the paper was the sound of a rat chewing through a rope. He pushed the document back to me. "Did I do good, Dad?" he asked, looking for approval. "Did I fix it?" I took the paper and put it back in my pocket. I stood up. I looked down at him one last time. "You did what you always do, Darnell," I said. "You took the easy way out." I knocked on the door. The guard opened it immediately. "We are done here," I said. "Dad, wait," Darnell called out as I walked away. "Will you visit me? Will you put money on my commissary?" I didn't look back. The heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. I walked down the long gray hallway, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. I had the confession. I had the witness. Darnell was going to prison, but he was taking the Miller family down with him. It was a tragedy, but it was also justice. And sometimes justice is the only love a father has left to give. I sat in the command center of my home office, surrounded by the soft hum of servers and the cool blue light of high-definition monitors. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Most men my age were asleep dreaming of golf courses or grandchildren, but I was awake watching the perimeter of my property like a hawk guarding its nest. I knew she would come. Darnell was in custody. Brent was facing charges. The house of cards had collapsed, and there was only one person left standing in the wreckage with enough rage to try and burn the world down. Tiffany. She arrived in a battered sedan that she must have rented or stolen. I watched on the infrared camera as the car rolled to a stop a block away from my duplex. She stepped out into the darkness. She was not the polished socialite who had sipped champagne in the Oakview mansion. She looked like a phantom. Her blonde hair was matted and wild. She wore a dark hoodie pulled low over her face and stained sweatpants. In her right hand, she carried a heavy red plastic jerry can. The smell of gasoline would be overpowering even in the cold night air. She did not look around for witnesses. She did not hesitate. She walked toward my house with the jagged, stilted gait of someone fueled by pure, unadulterated madness. She had lost her husband. She had lost her status. She had lost her future. In her twisted mind, I was the architect of her misery, and fire was the only way to cleanse the slate. She crossed the street and stepped onto my lawn. She stopped for a moment, looking up at the dark windows of the second floor where she assumed I was sleeping. I zoomed in on her face with the camera. Her eyes were wide and glassy. Her lips were moving, muttering a mantra of hate. She unscrewed the cap of the gas can and began to pour. She splashed the liquid over my porch steps, soaking the welcome mat and the wood. She splashed it on the siding, She was reckless, splashing it onto her own shoes and pants. She wanted to burn me alive. She wanted to hear me scream. I did not reach for the phone to call 911. Not yet. I reached for the console on my desk. You see, Tiffany thought she was attacking an old man's house. She did not know she was attacking the fortress of a retired infrastructure engineer who had spent 30 years designing automated suppression systems for chemical plants and high-risk data centers. My home was not just brick and mortar. It was a machine, and I had just armed it. I watched her pull a silver lighter from her pocket. The flame flickered into life, a tiny orange dancer in the dark. She raised her arm, ready to throw it onto the gasoline-soaked porch. Now, I whispered. I pressed the activation button. The reaction was instantaneous. This was not a standard sprinkler system that trickled water. This was a military-grade suppression system designed for rapid containment. A series of nozzles hidden in the eaves of the porch and the flower beds exploded into action. They did not spray water. They sprayed a high-expansion chemical foam, a dense white substance used to smother jet fuel fires and hangars. It hit her with the force of a fire hose. The foam expanded on contact, filling the entire porch area in seconds. It knocked the lighter from her hand, extinguishing the flame instantly. It knocked Tiffany off her feet. She screamed, but the sound was muffled by the expanding white mass. The foam was sticky and heavy. It clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin. It filled the space, rising to waist height in a matter of heartbeats. She tried to stand, but she slipped on the slick chemical sludge. She tried to run, but the foam was like quicksand, weighing her down, disorienting her. She flailed her arms, looking like a drowning swimmer in a sea of marshmallows. I activated the second phase of the defense, the floodlights. 6,000 lumens of LED light blasted the front yard, turning the night into a blinding white day. Tiffany covered her eyes, shrieking in terror. She was completely exposed. A figure coated in white slime, smelling of gasoline and failure, trapped in a cage of light and foam. Then the audio system kicked in. I picked up my microphone. My voice was amplified by the external speakers booming over the neighborhood like the voice of God. "Tiffany Miller," I said, "drop the lighter. Stay where you are. You are trespassing on private property and you have attempted arson. The police have been notified." She froze, looking up at the speakers. She looked around frantically, trying to find a way out, but the foam made every movement a struggle. She was trapped in a prison of her own making. I walked to the window and looked down. She saw me. Even through the foam and the blinding light, our eyes met. "I hate you," she screamed. "You ruined my life. You are a devil." "I did not ruin your life, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm over the speakers. "You ruined it the day you decided people were objects to be used. You poured the gas. I just put out the fire." 2 minutes later, the sirens wailed. They didn't have to look far for the suspect. She was the only person in the neighborhood glowing white under the floodlights, stuck to my porch like a fly on flypaper. 2 officers approached her cautiously, their hands on their weapons. They smelled the gasoline immediately. They saw the red can lying on its side in the foam. There was no investigation needed. The crime scene was pristine in its clarity. They dragged her out of the foam. She slipped and slid, fighting them, kicking and screaming obscenities. They handcuffed her wrists behind her back. She looked ridiculous. She looked pathetic. The foam dripped from her nose and her chin. Her expensive hoodie was ruined. Her dignity was gone. I walked down the stairs and opened the front door. I stood on the threshold, careful not to step in the chemical sludge. The officers looked at me, then at the foam, then back at me. They looked impressed. "Hell of a system you have here, Mr. Moore," one officer said. "I like to be prepared," I replied. Tiffany looked up at me. Her face was streaked with tears and chemical residue. "Why didn't you just die?" she sobbed. "Why couldn't you just be a normal old man and die?" "Because I have work to do," I said, "and because I refuse to let a gold digger with a lighter write the end of my story." They put her in the back of the patrol car. She was still screaming as they drove away. I watched the taillights fade. I looked at my porch covered in white foam and gasoline. It would take a professional crew to clean it up. It would cost money. But as I stood there in the cold night air, I didn't care about the cost. I cared about the safety. I was safe. My legacy was safe. And the people who had tried to destroy me were all in cages of their own design. I went back inside and locked the door. I went to my office and turned off the floodlights. The darkness returned, but it wasn't scary anymore. It was the darkness of a peaceful night. I sat in my chair and closed my eyes. The family was gone. The threats were gone. All that was left was the future. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. The day of the trial arrived with the heavy gray weight of a judgment day. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The local media had descended like vultures, eager to pick at the carcass of the family drama that had played out on live streams and police blotters. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, my back straight, my hands resting on my knees. I wore my best suit, the navy blue wool one I had bought for Betty's funeral. Next to me, Reggie sat like a stone lion, his briefcase full of the paperwork that would seal the fate of my son and his wife. Darnell and Tiffany were led into the room in shackles. They were not sitting together. The state had separated them after Tiffany tried to claw Darnell's eyes out during their arraignment. Darnell looked like a shell of a man. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, and his hair, which he used to style with expensive gels, was matted and dull. He scanned the crowd frantically until his eyes landed on me. He didn't look angry. He looked pleading. He looked like he was still hoping I would stand up and tell the judge it was all a big mistake. Tiffany, on the other hand, looked feral. Her prison grays were stained, and she glared at me with a hatred so pure it almost crackled in the air. The defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, stood up to make his opening statement. He tried to paint a picture of me as a tyrant. He described Darnell as a desperate son pushed to the brink by a father who hoarded resources and demanded impossible standards. He called me a miser. He called me manipulative. He argued that Darnell's actions, while illegal, were the result of extreme financial duress caused by my cruelty. He tried to garner sympathy for the young couple struggling to survive in a harsh economy. While the patriarch sat on a pile of gold he refused to share. It was a good story. It was the story Darnell had told himself for years. Then it was my turn to take the stand. I walked up the steps to the witness box. I swore to tell the truth. I looked out at the jury, 12 strangers who would decide the ending of this tragedy. Reggie stood up. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He just asked one simple question. Mr. Moore, the defense claims your son was destitute and that you withheld support. Can you please state for the court your occupation and your estimated net worth? I leaned into the microphone. I looked directly at Darnell. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to understand the magnitude of what he had thrown away. I am a retired infrastructure engineer, I said, my voice filling the room. But I am also the founder, chairman, and sole proprietor of T&B Holdings. Darnell frowned. Nell. He knew the name T&B. It was on the lease of his house. It was on the registration of his car. But he had always assumed it was some faceless corporate entity I had rented from. He never put together that T stood for Thaddeus and B stood for Betty. T&B Holdings. I continued owns 12 commercial shopping centers in the tri-state area. It owns the industrial park on the west side. It holds the municipal contracts for the water filtration systems of this city and 3 others. It owns a portfolio of residential apartment complexes, including the one where I reside. The courtroom grew quiet. The scratching of the court reporter's machine was the only sound. And your net worth? Reggie prompted. I paused. I had never said the number out loud. I had kept it a secret even from myself in some ways. It was just numbers on a screen, a score in a game I was playing against poverty. As of the audit completed last week, my personal assets and corporate holdings are valued at approximately $62 million. The reaction was visceral. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The jury's eyes went wide, but the most violent reaction came from the defense table. Darnell's head snapped back as if he had been punched. 60 million. He mouthed the words. 60 million. He had sold a plot of land for $50,000 counterfeit cash. He had stolen $50,000 over 5 years. He had tried to kill me for an insurance policy he thought was worth maybe $200,000. He had been sitting at a table eating crumbs while starving, never realizing he was sitting in a bakery. Tiffany let out a low moan. She slumped in her chair, staring at me with a mixture of horror and greed. She had called me a pauper. She had laughed at my truck. She realized now that I could have bought her entire family tree and turned it into firewood without making a dent in my bank account. You lied, Darnell shouted, jumping up from his seat, his chains rattling. You lied to me. You acted poor. You drove that truck. You tricked me. Order. The judge banged his gavel. Sit down, defendant. I did not lie, Darnell, I said into the microphone. I just didn't brag. I lived below my means so I could build something lasting. I wanted to give it to you. All of it. It was all in the trust you tried to break into, the trust you destroyed. Darnell was breathing hard, hyperventilating. $60 million. He was doing the math. He was calculating the yachts, the cars, the houses. He was seeing the life he could have had if he had just been patient, if he had just been kind, if he had just opened the door on Christmas instead of slamming it. Reggie waited for the room to settle. He walked over to the evidence table and picked up a document. It was a single sheet of paper with a bank seal, Mr. Moore, Reggie said. The defense argues that your son is your only heir and that his actions were driven by the anxiety of his future inheritance. Can you please explain the current status of your estate? I looked at Darnell. This was the final blow. This was the mercy kill. I realized last week that money was the poison, I said. It was the disease that infected my family. It made my son lazy. It made him entitled. It made him a criminal. As long as that money existed, he would never learn. He would always be waiting for me to die. He would always be plotting. I took a deep breath. So I removed the temptation. Darnell froze. What? Yesterday morning, I said, my voice steady. I executed a wire transfer. I liquidated 80% of my liquid assets, and I signed over the deeds to the commercial properties to a charitable trust. No, Darnell whispered. No, you didn't. I donated $50 million to the Thaddeus and Betty Moore Scholarship Fund, I declared. It will provide full-ride university scholarships for underprivileged youth in this city. Kids who want to work. Kids who want to build something. Kids who would never slam a door in their father's face. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. $50 million gone, vanished from Darnell's future. I kept the house, I added, and enough for my retirement. But the inheritance, Darnell, the empire, it is gone. I gave it away. Because I love you enough to let you save yourself. You are going to prison with nothing. And when you come out, you will have nothing. You will have to work. And that is the only gift I have left to give you. Darnell stood up. He swayed. His face went gray. His eyes rolled back in his head. The reality of the loss was too much for his brain to process. He didn't just lose a lawsuit. He lost the lottery ticket he had been holding since birth. He collapsed. He hit the floor with a heavy thud, his chains clattering against the wood. Darnell Tiffany screamed. The bailiffs rushed forward. The judge called for a recess. I sat in the witness box and watched them tend to my son. I felt a profound sadness but no regret. I had cauterized the wound. I had burned away the rot. He was broke. He was going to prison. But for the first time in his life, he was free. He was free from the expectation of my money. He was free to be a man. Whether he survived that freedom was up to him. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the chaos behind me. I had a meeting with the scholarship board. I had futures to build. The snow fell softly on Oakview Drive, covering the manicured lawns in a blanket of pristine white. It was Christmas morning, exactly 1 year since the day my son slammed a heavy oak door in my face and told me I was no longer his family. I parked my Ford truck in the same spot I had parked it then, but this time no one looked at it with disgust. The street was quiet, but the house at number 42 was not. It was vibrating with life. The windows were glowing with a warmth that had nothing to do with expensive heating systems, and everything to do with the people inside. The sign on the front lawn did not say private property anymore. It was a hand-painted wooden sign that read the Betty Moore Community Center. I walked up the driveway carrying a 20-pound turkey wrapped in foil. The smell of sage and rosemary rose up to meet the cold air just like it had a year ago. But this time as I reached the porch, the door flew open before I could even ring the bell. It was not a sullen man in a velvet blazer blocking my path. It was a 12-year-old boy named Marcus wearing a sweater that was slightly too big for him. "Mr. Moore is here," Marcus shouted, his face splitting into a grin. He brought the bird. I stepped inside. The marble floors were scuffed from the shoes of 50 children running back and forth. The crystal chandelier was still there, but it was draped in paper chains made by hand. The silence of the mausoleum Darnell had built was gone, replaced by the chaotic, beautiful noise of laughter and music. Motown played from a speaker in the corner, filling the high ceilings with soul. This house, which had been a monument to vanity, was now a sanctuary. I had donated the property to the trust immediately after the trial. It was now a home for scholarship students who had nowhere else to go during the holidays. Kids who came from the same dirt I came from. Kids who knew the value of a roof over their heads. I walked into the dining room. The long mahogany table where Tiffany's parents had sipped their wine was now extended with folding tables to seat 30 people. There were no crystal flutes. There were paper cups and mismatched plates. The food wasn't catered lobster and truffle pasta. It was a potluck of epic proportions. Macaroni and cheese, collard greens, cornbread, candied yams, and potato salad made by the grandmother of one of the students. It smelled like home. It smelled like the kitchen Betty and I had shared for 40 years. Reginald Moss was sitting at the head of the table. The shark, the man who had terrified judges and destroyed Darnell's defense, was currently wearing a ridiculous red Santa hat with a white pom-pom. He had a napkin tucked into his collar and a drumstick in one hand. When he saw me, he stood up, wiping grease from his mouth. Thaddeus Reggie boomed his voice, still carrying that courtroom authority, but softened by the holiday spirit. "You are late. We were about to start without you." I set the turkey down in the center of the table. I peeled back the foil. The steam rose up and a collective sigh went through the room. "I am never late, Reggie," I said, smiling. "I just like to make an entrance." Reggie clapped me on the back. The students looked up at me with eyes that held something Darnell had never shown me. Respect. Not fear, not greed, just genuine respect. "Sit down, Mr. Moore," a young woman named Maya said. She was an engineering student at the State University, brilliant and driven, the first in her family to go to college. She pulled out a chair for me, the same chair Darnell used to sit in like a king. I sat down. I looked around the table. These were strangers by blood. I didn't know their ancestors. I hadn't changed their diapers. But as we passed the plates and shared the food, I felt a connection stronger than DNA. We talked about their classes. We talked about their dreams. We talked about concrete and steel and how to build things that last. Reggie told stories about our time in Vietnam, embellishing the details until we were all laughing so hard our sides hurt. He told them about the time I fixed a generator with a chewing gum wrapper and a prayer. He didn't talk about my money. He didn't talk about the $60 million. To these kids, I wasn't a bank account. I was a mentor. I was the man who gave them a chance. "This house," I said, tapping the table, "feels better now. It was too cold before. It had too much space and not enough heart." "It is a good house," Maya said. "It is warm. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for everything." I looked at her and I saw the future. Darnell had wanted to use my legacy to buy status. These kids were using it to buy freedom. That was the difference. After dinner, while the students were clearing the table and arguing playfully about who had to wash the dishes, I stepped away to the living room. A fire was crackling in the large stone fireplace. It was the only light in the room, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I walked over to the mantel. There was no stocking for Darnell. There were no photos of Tiffany. The slate had been wiped clean. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a white envelope. It was stamped with the seal of the State Correctional Facility. It had arrived yesterday. I had debated whether to open it. I had debated whether to bring it here. But I knew I needed to end this chapter where it began. I opened the envelope. The letter was written on lined yellow paper in pencil. Darnell's handwriting was small and cramped, completely different from the flamboyant signature he used to sign checks. "Dad," it read. "I hope you are okay. It is cold in here. I have a job in the laundry. I make 12 cents an hour. It is hard work. My hands hurt. I think about you a lot. I think about the truck. I think about the turkey. I am sorry. I know that word doesn't mean much coming from me, but I am. I lost everything because I didn't know what I had. Merry Christmas." I read it twice. I looked for the anger that used to burn in my gut. I looked for the betrayal, but I couldn't find them. They had faded, leaving behind a quiet, dull ache. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Darnell was learning the lesson of labor. He was learning that 12 cents earned by sweat is worth more than $100 given by a father. It was a hard lesson, a cruel lesson, but it was the only one that would save him. He was sorry. I believed him. Prison has a way of clarifying a man's perspective, but sorry didn't fix the window he broke. Sorry didn't erase the knife he brought into my home. Sorry didn't change the fact that he had chosen money over me. I looked at the fire. The flames licked at the logs, hungry and bright. "I love you, son," I whispered to the empty room. "I love you enough to let you stay where you are. I love you enough to let you become a man, even if you have to do it in a cage." I held the letter over the fire. The paper curled and browned from the heat. Then it caught. The yellow flame consumed the pencil words. It consumed the apology. It consumed the past. I watched it burn until it was nothing but black ash floating up the chimney into the cold winter night. I turned around. Reggie was standing in the doorway watching me. He held 2 glasses of cognac. He didn't ask about the letter. He didn't ask about Darnell. He knew. "To family," Reggie said, handing me a glass. I took it. I looked back toward the dining room where the laughter of 30 young people was filling the air. "To family," I repeated. "The one we build, not the one we are born with." We clinked glasses. The sound was a soft, clear bell in the warm room. I took a sip. It burned, going down a good, clean burn. I was 71 years old. I had lost a son, but I had gained a future. I walked back into the light of the dining room, ready to serve dessert. The turkey was gone. The past was ash. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly home. Thaddeus's journey teaches us a harsh but necessary truth. Shared DNA does not guarantee loyalty, nor does it entitle anyone to unconditional support in the face of disrespect. Darnell's downfall wasn't just about losing an inheritance. It was the inevitable result of valuing superficial status over genuine human connection. True wealth isn't found in bank accounts or luxury cars, but in the integrity of earning one's way and the bonds we build with those who truly respect us. Sometimes the most loving act a parent can do is to let their child fall so they might finally learn how to stand on their own. If you believe that true family is built on respect, rather than blood, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served.